Bear destroys church picnic. May 25th, 2025. Bear destroys church picnic. May 25th, 2025. The morning of May 25th, 2025 dawned crisp and clear over the Gallatin Valley, with the Bridger Mountains standing sentinel against a sky so blue it seemed painted by divine hand. Reverend John Timothy Miller stood on the back steps of St. Mary's Episcopal Church at 5:47 a.m., his weathered hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee, watching the first golden rays of sunlight cascade across the rolling hills that surrounded Bozeman, Montana. At 62 years old, John had seen his share of beautiful mornings, but something about this particular Sunday felt special, charged with an energy that made his soul sing with anticipation for the day ahead. The annual St. Mary's Church picnic had been a tradition for 37 years, ever since the congregation had grown large enough to warrant moving their fellowship beyond the confines of the modest sanctuary. John had been pastor here for the last 14 years, arriving fresh from seminary in Minneapolis, with his wife Margaret and their twin daughters, Sarah and Rebecca, who were now 28 and living their own lives in Seattle and Denver, respectively. Margaret had passed away 3 years ago after a brief but brutal battle with pancreatic cancer, leaving John to shepherd his flock through his own grief while maintaining the traditions she had helped establish and cherish. The picnic location had been Margaret's discovery, a sprawling meadow nestled in Hyalite Canyon, approximately 23 miles southeast of Bozeman along Hyalite Canyon Road. The site sat at an elevation of 6,200 feet, surrounded by dense stands of lodgepole pine, Douglas fir, and aspen trees that created a natural amphitheater of green. Hyalite Creek meandered through the eastern edge of the meadow, its crystal-clear waters providing a constant, soothing soundtrack that Margaret had always said sounded like angels whispering prayers. The meadow itself stretched roughly 4 acres, with gentle slopes rising on 3 sides, and the creek forming the 4th boundary. It was far enough from the main hiking trails to provide privacy for their gathering, yet accessible enough for the elderly members of their congregation to navigate without difficulty. John took another sip of his coffee and mentally reviewed the day's schedule. The first caravan of vehicles would depart the church parking lot at 9 a.m. sharp, led by himself in his aging but reliable 2018 Ford Explorer. The setup crew, consisting of 8 dedicated volunteers, would arrive at the meadow by 9:45 a.m. to begin arranging tables, erecting the large canvas pavilion tent that had served them faithfully for over a decade, and establishing the various activity stations. The pavilion, a massive 30 by 40-foot structure in forest green, would serve as the central hub of the gathering, housing the potluck tables and providing shade for the elderly congregants. Eleanor Catherine Hartwell, 78 years old and the unofficial coordinator of all church social events, had been planning this picnic with military precision for the past 2 months. Her weathered hands, adorned with the simple gold wedding band she'd worn for 56 years, had written countless lists, made dozens of phone calls, and orchestrated what she confidently predicted would be the most successful picnic in St. Mary's history. Eleanor's late husband, Frank, had been the one to suggest the Hyalite Canyon location decades ago, back when he was still mobile enough to hike the trails with her. Now, 3 years after Frank's passing from complications related to his diabetes, Eleanor threw herself into church activities with the fervor of someone who understood that purpose was often the best medicine for loneliness. By 6:30 a.m., Eleanor was already in her immaculate kitchen, her silver hair pinned back in the same style she'd worn since 1987, assembling legendary potato salad, a recipe that involved Yukon Gold potatoes, hand-chopped celery from her garden, real mayonnaise from a jar that cost more than most people spent on lunch, and a secret ingredient she had never revealed to anyone, not even her daughter Patricia, who lived in Billings and called every Sunday evening without fail, The potato salad alone would feed 30 people, but Eleanor was also bringing her famous chocolate chip cookies, baked from a recipe her grandmother had brought from Ireland in 1923, and a green bean casserole that had won the Gallatin County Fair's Blue Ribbon in 1996, 1998, and 2001. Across town, in a modest ranch house on West Lamb Street, Thomas Michael O'Brien was loading his 2020 Chevy Silverado with enough sporting equipment to outfit a small summer camp. At 45, Tom was the kind of man other men instinctively respected. 6 feet, 2 inches tall, with broad shoulders, earned through 23 years of construction work, hands that were permanently stained with evidence of honest labor, and a smile that could disarm even the most stubborn disagreement. His wife, Jessica Ann O'Brien, 39 years old with auburn hair that caught fire in sunlight and green eyes that seemed to hold secrets even she didn't know she possessed, was wrapping homemade brownies in aluminum foil while their 3 children, Michael, age 14, Jennifer, age 11, and little David, age 7, buzzed around the kitchen like caffeinated bees, their excitement for the picnic barely contained within their small bodies. Tom had been attending St. Mary's for 8 years, ever since Jessica had gently but persistently suggested that their family needed something more substantial than sleeping in on Sunday mornings. He had initially resisted, carrying the skepticism of a man who had seen too much hardship to easily trust in divine benevolence, but Reverend Miller's practical, compassionate approach to faith had gradually worn down his defenses. Now, Tom served on the church council and coordinated the annual men's retreat, finding in the community of believers something he hadn't realized he'd been missing his entire adult life. The O'Brien family's contribution to the picnic extended far beyond Jessica's brownies, though those alone were legendary among the congregation. Tom would be setting up and supervising the various outdoor games: horseshoes, cornhole, a softball diamond that required him to pace off exact distances and hammer temporary bases into the mountain soil, and a volleyball net that had been purchased with funds from the 2023 church rummage sale. Their 3 children would be among the 17 young people attending, ranging in age from David's 7 years to Rachel Henderson's 15 years, creating a multi-generational tapestry that embodied the best of what St. Mary's represented. Meanwhile, in the kitchen of their sprawling 2-story home on South Grand Avenue, Dr. Patricia Louise Hendricks was carefully packing a medical kit that would have been appropriate for a small field hospital. At 58, Patricia had been practicing family medicine in Bozeman for 26 years, and her cautious nature had been honed by decades of treating everything from altitude sickness in overzealous hikers to traumatic injuries sustained by individuals who had underestimated the unforgiving nature of Montana's wilderness. She never attended any outdoor gathering without being prepared for medical emergencies, a habit that had proven invaluable on 3 previous occasions during church events. Her medical kit, contained in a large red duffel bag that had accompanied her on mission trips to Guatemala, Honduras, and rural Alaska, included advanced trauma supplies, prescription medications for common emergencies, a blood pressure cuff, stethoscope, digital thermometer, glucose testing supplies, emergency epinephrine injectors, advanced wound care materials, and even a portable oxygen concentrator that could operate on battery power for up to 4 hours. Patricia's husband, James Robert Hendricks, a semi-retired accountant who had handled the books for half the small businesses in Bozeman over his 40-year career, had long since stopped questioning his wife's compulsive preparation for medical contingencies, particularly after she had saved the life of a stranger at a 4th of July celebration in 2019, when the man suffered a severe allergic reaction to a bee sting. Patricia's daughter, Rachel Marie Hendricks, 15 years old and possessed of her mother's analytical mind, coupled with her father's dry sense of humor, was looking forward to the picnic primarily because it offered an opportunity to spend time outdoors without the pressure of academic performance that dominated her daily existence as a junior at Bozeman High School. Rachel was already carrying a 4.1 GPA while taking advanced placement courses in biology, chemistry, calculus, and European history, all in service of her goal to follow her mother into medicine. However, today she was simply a teenager who wanted to wade in Hyalite Creek, take photographs of wildlife with the expensive camera her grandparents had given her for Christmas, and perhaps engage in harmless flirtation with Michael O'Brien, whose recent growth spurt had transformed him from annoying child to genuinely interesting young man. The morning air temperature held steady at 42 degrees Fahrenheit as the sun climbed higher, promising a perfect day with projected highs in the mid-70s and virtually no chance of precipitation, according to the National Weather Service forecast that Reverend Miller had checked 3 times before going to bed the previous night. The weather pattern showed a strong, high-pressure system dominating the entire Rocky Mountain region, which meant clear skies, gentle breezes, and the kind of postcard-perfect conditions that drew tourists from around the world to experience the majesty of Big Sky country. By 7:15 a.m., the early morning symphony of birds in the canyon had reached its crescendo. American robins, mountain chickadees, white-breasted nuthatches, and dark-eyed juncos filled the air with their territorial songs and mating calls, while high overhead, a pair of red-tailed hawks circled on thermals that were just beginning to form as the sun warmed the forest floor. The ecosystem of Hyalite Canyon was a complex web of interdependence that had evolved over millennia, creating habitat for dozens of mammal species, hundreds of bird species, and countless smaller creatures that formed the foundation of the food chain. Among the larger mammals that called this region home were white-tailed deer, mule deer, elk, moose, mountain goats, bighorn sheep, mountain lions, bobcats, lynx, gray wolves, and black bears. The black bear population in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, which included the Hyalite Canyon area, had been steadily recovering since the implementation of stricter garbage management protocols and educational programs designed to minimize human-bear conflicts. Wildlife biologists estimated that approximately 350 black bears currently inhabited the forests surrounding Bozeman, with population densities varying seasonally as the animals followed food sources and breeding opportunities across their vast territories. At precisely this moment, approximately 2½ miles southeast of the meadow, where St. Mary's congregation would gather in less than 3 hours, a large male black bear was methodically working his way through a patch of serviceberry bushes, his powerful jaws stripping the sweet purple berries from their branches with mechanical efficiency. This particular bear, approximately 7 years old and weighing roughly 430 pounds, had been tagged by Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks researchers 3 years earlier and designated as bear greater than MT-347 in their comprehensive database. His ear tag, a small yellow marker barely visible against his coal-black fur, indicated that he had never been involved in any documented conflicts with humans, though wildlife cameras had photographed him on numerous occasions as he traveled his territory in search of food and suitable denning sites. Bear greater than MT-347 stood nearly 3 feet tall at the shoulder when walking on all 4 legs, but could rear up to a height of almost 7 feet when standing upright to investigate interesting scents or potential threats. His coat was thick and lustrous, unmarked by the scars that often told stories of territorial disputes or encounters with vehicles. His snout was slightly grizzled with brown, and his small, intelligent eyes held the wariness of a wild creature that had learned to navigate an increasingly complex world where human activity intersected with ancient animal pathways and feeding grounds. The bear's daily caloric requirements during late spring approached 8,000 calories, necessitating nearly constant foraging, as he worked to rebuild the fat reserves depleted during his winter hibernation. His diet at this time of year consisted primarily of grasses, forbs, roots, nuts, berries, insect larvae, and occasional carrion. Though, like all black bears, he was an opportunistic omnivore capable of adapting his feeding behavior to take advantage of whatever food sources presented themselves. His sense of smell, estimated to be 7 times more acute than that of a bloodhound, allowed him to detect food sources from distances of up to several miles under favorable wind conditions. This morning, Bear MT347 had already consumed approximately 12 pounds of service berries, along with several pounds of new grass shoots and the grubs of various beetle species that he had excavated from rotting logs using his powerful claws. His internal clock, synchronized with the seasonal rhythms that had governed his species for thousands of generations, told him that the long summer days ahead offered unlimited opportunities to build the fat reserves that would sustain him through another winter hibernation that would begin in approximately 5 months. Back in Bozeman, the various families and individuals who comprised St. Mary's congregation were completing their final preparations for the day's adventure. Margaret Ann Sullivan, 84 years old and the oldest active member of the congregation, was carefully wrapping her famous apple pie in a thermal container that would keep it warm until lunchtime. Margaret had been attending St. Mary's for 47 years, through 3 different pastors, 2 major renovations of the sanctuary, countless joys and sorrows that had marked the passages of her long life. Her pie recipe, passed down from her Scottish grandmother, required her to begin preparation at 5 a.m. in order to have it ready for transport. But she had never missed a church picnic and wasn't about to start now. Her great-granddaughter, Emma Catherine Sullivan, aged 9, and possessed of Margaret's determined spirit in a much smaller package, was helping load the car while wearing a brand-new purple dress that her mother, Jennifer Sullivan Martinez, had purchased specifically for this occasion. Emma's parents, Jennifer and Carlos Martinez, had been married for 12 years and were planning to use today's picnic as an opportunity to announce to the congregation that they were expecting their second child in November. Carlos, a high school Spanish teacher who had immigrated to the United States from Honduras 15 years ago, had initially been skeptical about joining an Episcopal church, but Reverend Miller's inclusive theology and the congregation's warm acceptance had made St. Mary's feel like home. The Martinez family would be traveling to the picnic in their 2019 Honda Pilot, along with Margaret Sullivan, whose 1994 Buick LeSabre had been retired from long-distance driving after a minor fender bender the previous autumn. Carlos had spent the previous evening reviewing the route to Hyalite Canyon, studying topographic maps with the thoroughness of someone who had learned to be cautious about mountain roads after an unfortunate incident during his first winter in Montana, when he had slid off an icy road and spent 4 hours waiting for a tow truck in sub-zero temperatures. At 8:15 a.m., Reverend Miller's cell phone buzzed with a text message from Eleanor Hartwell. "All food loaded and ready. Should we pray for hungry teenagers to slow down at lunch?" He smiled at Eleanor's gentle humor, recognizing the joke's deeper truth about the capacity of adolescents to consume astonishing quantities of food, particularly when engaged in outdoor activities at altitude. He typed back, "God will provide, but maybe we should hide the desserts until after the blessing." The congregation's teenagers, led by Michael O'Brien and Rachel Hendricks, had developed an informal communication network that would have impressed military strategists. Michael had sent a group text at 7:30 a.m. to confirm plans for an ambitious hike to Hyalite Falls after lunch, a round-trip journey of approximately 4 miles that would take them away from the picnic site for roughly 2.5 hours. The hike had been approved by Reverend Miller and the adult chaperones, with the understanding that the teenagers would travel in a group, carry emergency whistles, and return to the meadow no later than 4 p.m. Rachel Hendricks had spent considerable time researching the geological and ecological features they would encounter on their hike, approaching the adventure with the same methodical preparation she brought to her academic studies. She had printed detailed information about the local flora and fauna, including a comprehensive guide to identifying potentially dangerous plants and animals. Her research had noted that black bear encounters were possible, but statistically unlikely, particularly during daylight hours, when bears typically avoided human activity. The Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks website recommended making noise while hiking, staying in groups, and carrying bear spray as standard precautions, all of which were included in their plans. By 8:45 a.m., the church parking lot resembled a staging area for a major expedition. 11 vehicles were arranged in formation, their cargo areas and passenger compartments packed with everything necessary to transport 87 people and enough food to feed twice that number to a remote mountain meadow. Reverend Miller walked among the assembled congregation, checking on last-minute details and offering the kind of gentle encouragement that had made him beloved among his flock. Eleanor Hartwell stood beside her 2016 Toyota Highlander, consulting a clipboard that contained her master checklist, backup checklist, and emergency contingency plans. She had assigned specific responsibilities to various volunteers, creating redundancy in critical areas like food safety, first aid preparedness, and transportation logistics. Her organizational skills, honed through decades of managing complex family gatherings and church events, had anticipated everything from forgotten serving spoons to sudden weather changes. "Reverend Miller," Eleanor called out, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard and heeded. "I've placed emergency contact information in each vehicle, along with the GPS coordinates for the meadow. Every driver has been briefed on the convoy protocol, and we have 3 people with satellite phones in case cell service is spotty." John nodded approvingly, marveling not for the first time at Eleanor's attention to detail. The satellite phones were a recent addition to their emergency preparedness arsenal, purchased by the church council after a scare 2 years ago when a member's insulin pump had malfunctioned during a winter retreat at a location with no cell coverage. Eleanor had argued persuasively that spending $800 on satellite phone rental was a wise investment in congregational safety, and the council had unanimously agreed. Dr. Patricia Hendricks approached the Reverend, her medical bag slung over her shoulder and a concerned expression on her face. "John, I've been monitoring the weather reports, and while conditions look perfect for today, I wanted to make sure everyone understands the altitude considerations. We're going from roughly 4,800 feet here in town to 6,200 feet at the meadow, which shouldn't cause problems for most people. But I want to keep an eye on the elderly members and anyone with respiratory conditions." "Madej, I'll make an announcement before we leave," John replied, appreciating Patricia's vigilance. "Anything else I should mention?" "Standard mountain safety," Patricia said, consulting her own mental checklist. "Stay hydrated, use sunscreen, wear appropriate footwear, and let someone know if you're feeling dizzy or nauseous. The UV exposure at that altitude can be intense, even on a partly cloudy day." At exactly 9 a.m., Reverend Miller climbed into his Ford Explorer, waited for all passengers to buckle their seatbelts, and led the convoy out of the church parking lot onto West Main Street. The procession of vehicles, hazard lights blinking in synchronized rhythm, drew smiles and waves from pedestrians and other drivers who recognized the annual migration of St. Mary's congregation to their mountain sanctuary. The route to Hyalite Canyon followed South 19th Avenue to Kagi Boulevard, then southeast on Sourdough Road, before connecting to Hyalite Canyon Road. The total distance from the church to their destination was 23.7 miles, with the final 8 miles consisting of winding mountain road that climbed steadily through increasingly dense forest. Cell phone service became progressively more spotty as they gained elevation, dropping to 0 bars by the time they reached the 5,800-foot elevation marker. During the 20-minute drive through town and the beginning of the canyon road, the convoy maintained a steady 45 miles per hour, allowing adequate following distance while keeping the group together. Reverend Miller monitored his rearview mirror constantly, using his CB radio to communicate with Tom O'Brien, who was driving the sweep vehicle at the rear of the convoy. The CB radio system had been Tom's suggestion, based on his experience coordinating construction crews across job sites, where reliable communication was essential for both efficiency and safety. As they climbed into the foothills, the landscape transformed from the agricultural and residential areas surrounding Bozeman to the pristine wilderness that defined southwestern Montana. Dense stands of lodgepole pine, their straight trunks reaching skyward like natural cathedral columns, gave way to mixed forests of Douglas fir, Engelmann spruce, and aspen trees, whose leaves were just beginning to show the brilliant green of late spring. Wildflowers dotted the forest floor, Indian paintbrush, lupine, beargrass, and dozens of other species that would reach their peak bloom in the coming weeks. Eleanor Hartwell, riding in the passenger seat of Tom O'Brien's truck because she wanted to supervise the unloading process from the final vehicle in the convoy, used the drive to review her mental checklist one final time. The pavilion tent, tables, chairs, serving supplies, games equipment, first aid stations, trash bags, recycling containers, hand-washing stations, emergency communication devices, and enough food to satisfy even the most optimistic appetite estimates. Everything had been accounted for and loaded according to her detailed plan. In the third vehicle, Dr. Hendricks was pointing out geological features to her daughter Rachel and young David O'Brien, who had requested to ride with them because Rachel had promised to show him how to identify different types of rocks and minerals. Patricia's impromptu geology lesson covered the formation of the Gallatin Range, the evidence of ancient glacial activity visible in the U-shaped valley they were traversing, and the ongoing geological processes that continued to shape the landscape. "See those scree slopes?" Patricia pointed to a steep hillside covered with loose rock fragments. "That's where winter freeze-thaw cycles gradually break apart the bedrock, creating those loose rock piles. It's a perfect example of mechanical weathering in action." Rachel added her own commentary, having studied these formations extensively for her earth science class. The really cool thing is that this whole area was under ice sheets thousands of years ago, and when the glaciers retreated, they carved out these valleys and left behind all those moraines, basically piles of rocks and dirt that the glaciers pushed along as they moved. David O'Brien, despite being only 7 years old, was genuinely fascinated by the geological lesson. His parents had noted his unusual interest in science and natural phenomena, encouraging his curiosity while being careful not to push him beyond his developmental readiness. Today's adventure represented the perfect opportunity for him to explore his interests in a supportive environment surrounded by adults who appreciated his enthusiasm. Meanwhile, approximately 3 miles ahead of the convoy's current position, Bear MT-347 had left the Serviceberry Patch and was following a game trail that paralleled Hyalite Creek. His massive paws, equipped with non-retractable claws up to 4 inches long, left distinct impressions in the soft soil along the creek bank. Each print measured roughly 7 inches long and 5 inches wide, with the rear pad clearly visible along with the marks of all 5 toes and their accompanying claws. The bear's movement through the forest was surprisingly quiet for an animal of his size, a testament to the evolutionary adaptations that had allowed his species to thrive as apex predators and omnivorous foragers for millions of years. His thick fur provided insulation against temperature variations, while his powerful leg muscles propelled his substantial bulk with deceptive speed and agility. Black bears were capable of reaching speeds up to 30 miles per hour in short bursts, climbing trees with ease despite their weight, and swimming across substantial bodies of water when necessary. Bear greater than MT-347's current trajectory would, if he maintained his present course and speed, bring him within approximately 1/2 mile of the Saint Mary's picnic site by early afternoon. However, bears were notoriously unpredictable in their movement patterns, often deviating from established routes in response to food odors, territorial boundaries, mating opportunities, or simple curiosity about unusual activities in their domain. At 9:43 a.m., the convoy reached the turnoff for the meadow, marked by a small wooden sign that read, "Higher Light Creek Meadow, Private Access," and a cattle guard that required careful navigation by each vehicle. The final half-mile to their destination followed a rough dirt road that had been improved over the years through the efforts of the landowner, a retired rancher named Harold Peterson, who had generously allowed St. Mary's congregation to use his property for their annual gathering. Harold Peterson, 79 years old and a lifelong resident of the Gallatin Valley, had developed a warm friendship with Reverend Miller over the years, often joining the congregation for their picnic, despite being a steadfast Lutheran who attended services at Shepherd of the Valley Lutheran Church in Bozeman. Harold's late wife, Martha, had been the one to suggest allowing the Episcopalians to use their meadow, arguing that the land was meant to be shared and enjoyed, rather than sitting empty, except for the occasional visit from wildlife. The meadow itself opened before them like a scene from a nature documentary, a perfect oval of green grass, surrounded by towering conifers and bisected by Higher Light Creek's meandering path. The morning sun cast long shadows across the grass, while the creek's constant murmur provided a peaceful soundtrack that immediately began to lower stress levels and elevate moods among the arriving congregation members. Reverend Miller parked his Explorer at the designated spot near the eastern edge of the meadow, where a natural depression provided some protection from wind while offering easy access to the creek for water and cleanup needs. As he stepped out of his vehicle, the mountain air filled his lungs with its crisp purity, carrying scents of pine, wildflowers, and the clean sweetness of snow-fed creek water. The setup process began immediately, with Eleanor Hartwell directing volunteers with the precision of a symphony conductor. The pavilion tent required 8 people to assemble properly, its heavy canvas panels and steel framework demanding careful coordination to avoid injury and ensure proper stability. Tom O'Brien supervised the structural assembly, while Eleanor focused on the placement of tables and chairs within the pavilion's protective embrace. Dr. Hendricks established her medical station at a picnic table positioned strategically between the pavilion and the parking area, allowing easy access for both minor injuries and potential emergency evacuations. Her red medical bag sat prominently displayed, along with a hand-lettered sign that read, "First Aid, Dr. Hendricks," in large, clear letters that could be read from a significant distance. By 10:30 a.m., the meadow had been transformed into an outdoor sanctuary that rivaled any church sanctuary for its ability to inspire awe and contemplation. The pavilion tent stood majestically in the center of the space, its forest green canvas complementing the natural surroundings. Picnic tables arranged in a large circle created intimate conversation areas, while maintaining the sense of community that characterized St. Mary's Fellowship. The food service area occupied one entire side of the pavilion, with Eleanor Hartwell's military-style organization ensuring that hot dishes would remain hot, cold dishes would stay cold, and serving utensils would be available at exactly the right moments. Coolers filled with ice surrounded the setup, their contents protected by tarps and strategic placement in shaded areas. The ice had been purchased from 3 different sources to ensure adequate supply, with backup ice stored in Tom O'Brien's truck in case of unexpected needs. Children's activity areas had been established at safe distances from the food service, with boundaries clearly marked using colourful rope that the children had helped string between trees during the setup process. The horseshoe pits had been carefully measured and marked, while the volleyball net stood taut and properly aligned, according to official specifications that Tom O'Brien had looked up on his smartphone before losing cell service. Margaret Sullivan, despite her 84 years, insisted on helping with the setup, her experience and wisdom proving invaluable as younger volunteers struggled with unfamiliar equipment and procedures. Her apple pie sat in a place of honor at the center of the dessert table, surrounded by Eleanor's chocolate chip cookies, Jessica O'Brien's brownies, and an impressive array of other homemade confections that represented hours of loving preparation. As the setup neared completion, Reverend Miller gathered the congregation for a brief safety briefing that covered everything from creek safety for the children to wildlife awareness for everyone. His words were calm and reassuring, emphasizing common-sense precautions rather than creating anxiety about potential dangers. "We are guests in this beautiful wilderness," John said, his voice carrying clearly across the meadow. "That means we need to be respectful of the wildlife that calls this place home year-round. Black bears do live in this area, though encounters are extremely rare, especially during daylight hours with this many people present. The most important thing is to keep all food properly stored when we're not actively eating and to clean up thoroughly when we're finished." Dr. Hendricks added her own medical perspective to the safety briefing, reminding everyone about altitude considerations, sun protection, and the importance of staying hydrated. She also reviewed the locations of emergency equipment and communication devices, ensuring that multiple people knew how to operate the satellite phones if needed. At 11:15 a.m., with setup complete and safety briefings concluded, the congregation began to settle into the relaxed rhythm that characterized their annual mountain retreat. Children immediately gravitated toward the creek, where the clear water revealed smooth stones, small fish, and the occasional crawfish that triggered excited discoveries and calls for adult verification of their finds. The adults arranged themselves in comfortable conversation groups, with folding chairs positioned to take advantage of both shade and scenic views. Coffee appeared from multiple thermoses, while the early arrivals of the food service began to emerge from their protective coverings, filling the mountain air with tantalizing aromas that would only grow stronger as the morning progressed toward lunchtime. Eleanor Hartwell assumed her traditional position as unofficial hostess, moving gracefully between groups to ensure that everyone felt included and welcomed. Her social skills, refined through decades of similar gatherings, allowed her to seamlessly integrate the various generations and personality types that comprised St. Mary's diverse congregation. Meanwhile, the teenage contingent was finalizing plans for their afternoon hike to Highlight Falls, with Michael O'Brien serving as the unofficial leader due to his extensive hiking experience and knowledge of the local trail system. Rachel Hendricks had appointed herself as the group's naturalist guide, carrying field guides for birds, plants, and geological features in a day pack that also contained emergency supplies and communication equipment. "The trail is well marked and heavily used," Michael explained to the group of 6 teenagers who had committed to the adventure. "It's about 2 miles each way, with maybe 800 feet of elevation gain, so definitely manageable for everyone here. The falls are absolutely incredible this time of year, with all the snowmelt coming down from the peaks." Rachel consulted her printed materials, which included detailed topographic maps, trail descriptions, and emergency protocols. According to the Forest Service website, the biggest risks are typical hiking stuff: staying on the trail, watching for loose rocks, and being aware of wildlife. Bears are possible, but unlikely with our group size, and mountain lions are extremely rare in this area during daylight hours. As the morning progressed toward lunchtime, the meadow continued to fill with the sounds of human fellowship, laughter, conversation, children playing, and the gentle bustle of food preparation. The temperature had risen to a comfortable 68 degrees, with a gentle breeze from the southwest, carrying the scents of pine and wildflowers across the gathering. At 11:45 a.m., approximately 2 miles southeast of the meadow, Bear MT-347 paused in his foraging to investigate an interesting scent carried on the mountain breeze. His sensitive nose detected the complex mixture of food odors that indicated human activity, cooking meat, baked goods, and the dozens of other aromatic compounds that accompanied large gatherings of people preparing and consuming meals. The bear's response to these scents was not aggressive or predatory, but rather reflected the natural curiosity and opportunistic feeding behavior that had allowed his species to adapt successfully to changing environmental conditions over thousands of years. Food sources that required minimal energy expenditure while providing maximum caloric return were always worthy of investigation, particularly during the critical period when bears were rebuilding their fat reserves after winter hibernation. Bear, greater than MT-347, altered his course slightly, following his nose toward the source of the interesting odors. His movement was deliberate but unhurried, reflecting the confidence of an apex predator in familiar territory. He had encountered human scents before without incident, and his previous experiences had taught him that humans were generally more frightened of bears than bears were of humans. Back at the picnic site, the official lunch service began at 12 p.m., with Reverend Miller offering a blessing that acknowledged both the natural beauty surrounding them and the community of faith that had brought them together in this remarkable setting. His words, carried on the mountain breeze, seemed to resonate with the eternal rhythms of wilderness and worship that had drawn humans to seek the divine in natural settings throughout history. Gracious God, John's voice carried clearly across the meadow, we gather in gratitude for this magnificent creation that surrounds us, for the fellowship that binds us together, and for the abundance that allows us to share this feast in the heart of your wilderness cathedral. Bless this food, bless this gathering, and help us to be worthy stewards of all the gifts you have provided. Amen. The buffet line formed with the organized efficiency that characterized all of Eleanor Hartwell's food service operations, ensuring that everyone would have access to their preferred dishes while maintaining proper food safety temperatures and minimizing wait times. The variety of options reflected the diverse culinary traditions represented within St. Mary's congregation. Traditional American picnic fare, alongside dishes that honored the Hispanic, Scandinavian, Irish, and German heritage of various member families. Dr. Hendricks had positioned herself strategically near the food service area, maintaining visual contact with her medical station while participating in the social aspects of the gathering. Her professional training had taught her that medical emergencies often occurred during moments of relaxation when people were less vigilant about their surroundings and physical limitations. The children's table, established at a safe distance from the adult dining areas, quickly became a center of animated conversation and laughter as the youngest members of the congregation compared their morning discoveries and planned their afternoon adventures. Emma Sullivan Martinez had appointed herself as the unofficial leader of the younger children, organizing games and activities with the natural authority of a child who was accustomed to being heard and respected by adults. Meanwhile, the teenage group was consuming food with the legendary efficiency of adolescence, their metabolisms demanding constant fuel for the complex biological processes of growth and development. Michael O'Brien's plate contained enough food to satisfy 2 adults, while Rachel Hendricks balanced her nutritional needs with her excitement about the upcoming hike, eating strategically to ensure sustained energy without feeling overly full during their trek to the falls. At 12:47 p.m., Bear MT-347 reached a ridgeline that provided his first direct visual contact with the St. Mary's picnic site. The meadow spread below him like a green carpet dotted with colourful human activity, the pavilion tent and assembled picnic tables creating a scene that was both fascinating and slightly concerning to his wild sensibilities. The bear's acute eyesight, significantly better than that of humans, allowed him to distinguish individual people moving around the meadow, though his understanding of human behaviour was limited to the basic recognition that humans travelled in groups, made considerable noise, and were associated with abundant food sources. He could see children playing near the creek, adults gathered around tables, and the general bustle of activity that indicated a large established gathering, rather than the small hiking groups that occasionally passed through his territory. From his elevated position, Bear MT-347 could also smell the incredible concentration of food odors rising from the meadow: meat, bread, sweet desserts, and dozens of other aromatic compounds that triggered powerful feeding responses in his brain. The caloric density represented by those odors far exceeded anything he could obtain through natural foraging, even during the peak berry season that was still several weeks away. The bear remained motionless on the ridgeline for approximately 8 minutes, processing the visual and olfactory information while weighing the potential risks and benefits of approaching the human gathering. His previous encounters with humans had been limited to brief sightings of hikers and campers, none of which had resulted in negative consequences. However, the size of this gathering was unlike anything in his experience, creating uncertainty about how to proceed. Down in the meadow, the lunch service was proceeding smoothly, with conversations flowing as freely as the coffee that several congregation members continued to consume despite the warming temperatures. Reverend Miller moved between tables, participating in multiple conversations while maintaining his pastoral awareness of individual needs and group dynamics. Eleanor Hartwell was in her element, ensuring that serving dishes remained full, that ice was replenished as needed, and that the complex logistics of feeding 87 people in a wilderness setting proceeded without any significant complications. Her organizational skills were legendary within the congregation, and today's picnic was shaping up to be another example of her ability to anticipate problems and implement solutions before minor issues became major disruptions. At 1:15 p.m., with lunch winding down and cleanup beginning, the teenage hiking group gathered their gear and prepared to depart for Hyalite Falls. Michael O'Brien conducted a final equipment check, ensuring that each member of the group carried water, emergency whistle, basic first aid supplies, and emergency contact information. Rachel Hendricks reviewed their planned route and estimated timeline, confirming that they would return to the meadow no later than 4 p.m. Dr. Hendricks approached the group with final medical reminders about staying hydrated, recognizing signs of altitude sickness, and immediate response protocols for any injuries or emergencies. She handed Rachel a satellite phone with detailed instructions for its operation, emphasizing that communication was their highest priority if any problems arose during the hike. Remember that you're hiking at altitude, so your exertion level will feel different than it would at lower elevations, Patricia advised the group. Take breaks when you need them. Drink water regularly, even if you're not feeling thirsty. And don't hesitate to turn back if anyone is struggling or if weather conditions change. The 6 teenagers, Michael O'Brien, Rachel Hendricks, Jennifer O'Brien, David Chen, whose family had joined St. Mary's 2 years earlier, Sarah Martinez, Jennifer Sullivan Martinez's 15-year-old niece, and Robert Hartwell, Eleanor's grandson who was visiting from Billings, set off across the meadow toward the trailhead, with the confident energy of young people embarking on an adventure in spectacular natural surroundings. As the hiking group disappeared into the forest, Bear, greater than MT-347, began his descent from the ridgeline toward the meadow below. His route followed a game trail that would bring him to within approximately 300 yards of the picnic site, close enough to thoroughly investigate the food sources that had captured his attention while remaining concealed within the dense forest that surrounded the meadow. The bear's movement down the slope was careful and deliberate, his massive bulk balanced with the grace that came from a lifetime of navigating difficult terrain. His non-retractable claws provided excellent traction on loose soil and rocky surfaces, while his powerful leg muscles absorbed the impact of each step down the steep incline. Back at the picnic site, cleanup activities had begun in earnest, with volunteers working systematically to clear tables, secure leftover food, and prepare for the afternoon's recreational activities. Eleanor Hartwell supervised the food storage process, with particular attention to proper refrigeration and protection from insects, wildlife, and contamination. "Make sure those cooler lids are sealed tight," Eleanor instructed her helpers. "And let's get the leftover desserts into the refrigerated containers before they start to soften in this sunshine. We want everything to be perfect for our afternoon snack time." Tom O'Brien was organizing equipment for the planned recreational activities, setting out horseshoes, cornhole games, frisbees, and a softball that several of the men had discussed using for an informal game later in the afternoon. The volleyball net stood ready for what had become an annual tradition of congregation members displaying varying levels of athletic ability in spirited but friendly competition. Dr. Hendricks returned to her medical station, using the post-lunch lull to review her supplies and ensure that everything remained properly organized and easily accessible. Her professional experience had taught her that medical emergencies often occurred during the most relaxed moments of any gathering, when people let down their guard and became less cautious about potential hazards. At 1:43 p.m., Bear MT-347 reached the forest edge at the southern boundary of the meadow, positioning himself behind a massive Douglas fir tree that provided excellent concealment while offering clear sightlines to the human activity approximately 200 yards away. From this position, he could observe the picnic site while remaining completely hidden from the humans who continued their post-lunch activities without any awareness of his presence. The bear's acute senses provided him with detailed information about the scene before him. He could see elderly humans moving slowly around tables, middle-aged adults engaged in cleanup activities, and children playing various games near the creek. The concentration of food odors was almost overwhelming, triggering powerful biological responses that urged him to investigate more closely. However, Bear, greater than MT-347, also possessed the caution that had allowed him to survive 7 years in the wilderness without serious injury or conflict with humans. The size of this gathering was unprecedented in his experience, creating uncertainty about how these particular humans might respond to his presence. His instincts told him to proceed carefully, gathering more information before committing to any course of action. Margaret Sullivan, despite her advanced age, was helping with cleanup activities when she paused to rest in the shade of the pavilion tent. Her keen eyes, sharpened by 8 decades of careful observation, noticed movement at the forest edge that seemed inconsistent with wind patterns or the small wildlife that had been visible throughout the morning. "John?" Margaret called quietly to Reverend Miller, her voice carrying just enough urgency to capture his attention without alarming other congregation members. "I think there might be something large moving in those trees over there." Reverend Miller followed Margaret's gaze toward the southern edge of the meadow, where the dense forest created deep shadows that made detailed observation difficult. He studied the area carefully for several moments, looking for any signs of movement or shapes that seemed out of place among the natural patterns of trees and undergrowth. "I don't see anything specific," John said quietly, "but your eyes have always been better than mine. Should we mention it to Dr. Hendricks? She's been keeping track of wildlife precautions all day." Before Margaret could respond, a slight shift in wind direction carried the concentrated food odors from the picnic site directly toward Bear MT-347's position at the forest edge. The powerful olfactory stimulus triggered an immediate response in the bear's brain, overriding his cautious instincts with the biological imperative to investigate potential food sources. Bear, greater than MT-347, stepped out from behind the Douglas fir tree and began walking slowly across the meadow toward the picnic site. His movement was deliberate but non-aggressive, reflecting curiosity rather than predatory behavior. However, his massive size and undeniable presence as a wild predator in close proximity to humans immediately transformed the peaceful picnic gathering into a potentially life-threatening emergency situation. The first person to notice the bear's emergence from the forest was little David O'Brien, who had been collecting interesting rocks near the creek when movement in his peripheral vision caught his attention. The 7-year-old boy stood motionless for several seconds, his young mind struggling to process the sight of a large black bear walking across the meadow toward their picnic area. "Mom!" David's voice carried across the meadow with the piercing clarity that only a frightened child could achieve. "There's a really big bear coming toward us." The effect of David's announcement was instantaneous and electric. Every adult head turned toward the forest edge, where Bear greater than MT-347 was now clearly visible against the green backdrop of the meadow, approximately 150 yards from the pavilion tent and closing the distance with each deliberate step. Dr. Hendricks immediately activated her emergency training, moving quickly but calmly toward her medical station while calling out clear instructions to the congregation. "Everyone move slowly toward the vehicles," she commanded in a voice that carried absolute authority. "Don't run, don't make sudden movements, and don't make direct eye contact with the bear." Eleanor Hartwell, despite her 78 years, demonstrated the presence of mind that had made her an effective leader in countless crisis situations throughout her long life. "Children to the cars first," she called out, her voice steady and clear. "Adults, help the elderly, and then follow. Move slowly and stay together." Reverend Miller positioned himself between the approaching bear and his congregation, his pastoral instincts overriding his personal safety concerns. His calm presence provided a stabilizing influence as families began the careful evacuation process that Dr. Hendricks had initiated. "Patricia," John called to Dr. Hendricks, "should we try to make noise to discourage him, or is silence better?" "Silence for now," Patricia replied, her medical training including wilderness emergency protocols that specifically addressed bear encounters. "He doesn't seem aggressive, just curious about our food. If we don't threaten him, he might investigate and then leave on his own." Bear, greater than MT-347, continued his approach toward the picnic site, his attention focused primarily on the incredible concentration of food odors that grew stronger with each step. His body language remained relaxed and non-threatening, with no signs of the aggressive posturing that would indicate predatory behavior or territorial defense. However, the bear's peaceful intentions were irrelevant to the human families who found themselves sharing space with a 400-pound wild predator whose behavior was ultimately unpredictable. The evacuation process continued with remarkable organization and calm, considering the circumstances, as parents shepherded children toward vehicles while elderly congregation members received assistance from younger adults. Tom O'Brien had reached his truck and was quietly retrieving his hunting rifle from its locked case behind the driver's seat. As a lifelong outdoorsman, Tom understood that the best outcome for both humans and bear would be a peaceful resolution that didn't require lethal force, but his protective instincts demanded that he be prepared for any escalation of the situation. "Tom," Dr. Hendricks called quietly from her position near the medical station, "do you have bear spray in your gear?" "In my pack in the truck," Tom replied, keeping his voice low while maintaining visual contact with the approaching bear. "Should I get it?" "Yes, but slowly," Patricia responded. "Bear spray is usually more effective than firearms for stopping a charging bear, and it's non-lethal if we can resolve this without anyone getting hurt." As the evacuation continued, Bear MT-347 reached the outer edge of the picnic area where the first picnic tables had been arranged in the morning. His nose led him directly to a table where Eleanor Hartwell's chocolate chip cookies had been temporarily placed during the cleanup process, their sweet aroma creating an irresistible attractant for the hungry bear. The bear reared up on his hind legs to investigate the table more thoroughly, his full height of nearly 7 feet creating a truly intimidating presence that sent several children into quiet tears despite their parents' efforts to maintain calm. From his upright position, Bear MT-347 could see the extensive food service area under the pavilion tent, where dozens of containers held the remains of the congregation's feast. "He's focused on the food," Margaret Sullivan observed quietly from her position near Tom O'Brien's truck. "Maybe if we just let him eat what he wants, he'll leave us alone?" Reverend Miller nodded, recognizing the wisdom in Margaret's suggestion. "Everyone stay calm and give him plenty of space," he called softly to his congregation. "Dr. Hendricks, what's our best course of action here?" Patricia consulted her mental database of wilderness emergency protocols, weighing the various options available to them. "If he's just investigating our food, the safest approach is probably to let him do that while we maintain our distance. Most bear encounters end peacefully if humans don't try to defend food sources or threaten the bear's escape route." Bear, greater than MT-347, dropped back to all 4 legs and began systematically investigating the picnic tables, his powerful nose leading him from one food source to another. Eleanor's cookies disappeared in a matter of seconds, followed by the remnants of several other dishes that hadn't been completely cleared during the initial cleanup process. The bear's feeding behavior was methodical rather than frenzied, suggesting that he wasn't starving or desperately hungry, but rather taking advantage of an unusual opportunity to consume high-calorie human foods. His body language remained relaxed, with no signs of the aggressive posturing that would indicate a shift toward more dangerous behavior. However, Bear MT-347's investigation of the picnic area inevitably led him toward the pavilion tent, where the main food service area contained the majority of the remaining feast. The bear's approach to the tent represented a significant escalation of the situation, as it would place him in much closer proximity to humans and potentially trigger more aggressive responses if he felt cornered or threatened. "He's heading for the main food area," Tom O'Brien observed, his hand resting on the bear spray canister that he had retrieved from his pack. "If he goes under that tent, it's going to be a lot harder to predict what he'll do next." Dr. Hendricks had positioned herself to maintain visual contact with both the bear and her scattered congregation, while remaining close enough to her medical station to respond quickly if anyone was injured during the encounter. Her professional training had prepared her for many emergency situations, but a black bear investigation of a church picnic was definitely outside her normal scope of experience. At 2:17 p.m., Bear MT-347 reached the edge of the pavilion tent and paused, his sensitive nose processing the incredible concentration of food odors that emanated from beneath the canvas shelter. The enclosed space created a natural funnel that concentrated aromas, making the tent's interior seem like the epicenter of an olfactory paradise from the bear's perspective. The bear's hesitation at the tent's edge provided a crucial moment of relative stability in what had become an increasingly tense situation. Most of the congregation had reached the safety of their vehicles, though several adults remained outside to monitor the bear's behavior and coordinate any necessary emergency responses. "Should we try to discourage him from going under the tent?" Eleanor Hartwell asked quietly from her position near the vehicles. Despite her age, Eleanor's mind remained sharp and focused on problem-solving rather than panic. "I think we should let him make his own choices," Patricia Hendricks replied, her medical training emphasizing the importance of not escalating already dangerous situations through unnecessary interventions. If he feels trapped or threatened, he's much more likely to become aggressive. Bear, greater than MT347, made his decision and ducked under the pavilion tent, where he was immediately surrounded by the concentrated food odors that had drawn him across the meadow in the first place. Tables laden with serving dishes, coolers filled with perishables, and the general abundance of a well-planned picnic feast created a situation that exceeded the bear's wildest expectations. The bear began feeding systematically, starting with the dessert table, where Margaret Sullivan's apple pie sat alongside Eleanor Hartwell's remaining cookies and Jessica O'Brien's brownies. The sweet, high-calorie content of these foods provided exactly the kind of energy-dense nutrition that bears craved during their post-hibernation recovery period. From their positions near the vehicles, the congregation watched in fascination and horror as Bear MT347 methodically consumed the results of their morning's careful preparation. Dishes that had required hours of cooking and baking disappeared in minutes, while coolers were overturned and their contents scattered across the tent floor. "Well," Margaret Sullivan said, with the dry humor that had sustained her through 8 decades of unexpected challenges, "I guess we know the pie was good enough to attract some very demanding critics." Her comment drew nervous laughter from several congregation members, providing a moment of stress relief that helped maintain group cohesion during an unprecedented crisis. Reverend Miller smiled at Margaret's resilience, recognizing her ability to find hope and humor even in the most challenging circumstances. As Bear, greater than MT347, continued his investigation of the food service area, his movements became more energetic and less careful, resulting in the overturning of tables and the destruction of equipment that had been carefully arranged earlier in the day. Folding chairs scattered across the tent floor, while serving utensils and plates were trampled underfoot by the bear's massive paws. "He's really making a mess in there," Tom O'Brien observed, stating the obvious with the kind of understatement that helped maintain emotional equilibrium during stressful situations. "Eleanor's going to need a whole new set of serving dishes after this is over." Eleanor Hartwell watched the destruction of her carefully organized food service with the philosophical acceptance of someone who had learned to distinguish between significant problems and mere inconveniences. "Dishes can be replaced," she said calmly. "Nobody's been hurt, and that's what really matters." At 2:31 p.m., Bear MT347 emerged from the pavilion tent, his belly visibly distended from consuming an enormous quantity of human food in a relatively short period of time. The bear's body language suggested satisfaction rather than continued hunger, indicating that his investigation of the picnic site might be nearing its conclusion. However, the bear's next actions would prove that wild animals are inherently unpredictable, regardless of how carefully humans attempt to interpret their behavior and intentions. Instead of returning to the forest, as everyone hoped, Bear, greater than MT347, began investigating the scattered congregation members who remained outside their vehicles, his curiosity apparently extending beyond food sources to include the humans themselves. The bear's approach toward the people represented a significant escalation of the danger level, as it would bring him into direct proximity with individuals who might react unpredictably to close contact with a large predator. Dr. Hendricks immediately recognized the increased threat and began implementing more active safety measures. "Everyone into the vehicles right now," Patricia called out with unmistakable authority. "Don't wait to see what he's going to do next. Get in the cars and close the doors." Reverend Miller hesitated, his pastoral instincts making him reluctant to abandon the picnic site while the bear remained present. But Tom O'Brien's firm hand on his shoulder convinced him that discretion was indeed the better part of valor in this particular situation. "Come on, John," Tom said quietly. "There's nothing we can do to help the situation by staying out here, and Patricia's right about getting everyone to safety." As the last of the congregation members reached the relative safety of their vehicles, Bear, greater than MT347, continued his investigation of the picnic area, methodically examining everything that carried interesting scents or seemed worthy of closer inspection. His behavior remained non-aggressive, but his size and unpredictability created a sense of contained tension that affected everyone present. From inside Tom O'Brien's truck, Eleanor Hartwell maintained her vigil over the situation, her organizational instincts focused on accounting for every member of the congregation and ensuring that no one had been left behind in the evacuation process. Her mental roll call confirmed that all adults and children were safely inside vehicles, with the exception of the teenage hiking group that had departed for Hyalite Falls before the bear's arrival. "Tom," Eleanor said quietly, "do we need to worry about the kids who went hiking? Will they be walking back into this situation when they return?" Tom considered the question carefully, his knowledge of the local trail system helping him evaluate the potential risks. "They're supposed to be back around 4 o'clock, and they'll be coming from the north side of the meadow. If the bear's still here, they should be able to see the situation before they get too close." Dr. Hendricks, monitoring the bear's behavior from her position in the Henderson family vehicle, was calculating response times for various emergency scenarios. The satellite phones provided communication capability, but emergency response teams would require significant time to reach their remote location, meaning that the congregation would need to be self-sufficient for at least 45 minutes to an hour. "If this situation goes badly," Patricia said to her husband and daughter, "our biggest advantages are that we have good communication equipment, basic medical supplies, and enough vehicles to evacuate quickly if necessary. The bear doesn't seem aggressive, but wild animals can change their behavior very suddenly." Rachel Hendricks, despite being only 15 years old, was documenting the encounter with her camera, recognizing that her photographs might prove valuable for later analysis by wildlife experts or emergency responders. Her scientific curiosity had overcome her fear, allowing her to observe and record the bear's behavior with remarkable objectivity. "Mom," Rachel said quietly, "he's actually behaving pretty much exactly like the textbooks say black bears behave when they encounter human food sources. He's not showing any signs of predatory behavior or territorial aggression. He's just investigating and feeding opportunistically." Patricia nodded approvingly at her daughter's analytical approach to the crisis, recognizing that Rachel's scientific mindset was helping her process the situation constructively rather than simply react with fear. "You're absolutely right. This is textbook bear behavior, which means it's also predictable to some extent." At 2:48 p.m., Bear MT347 completed his investigation of the immediate picnic area and began showing signs of preparing to leave. His body language had shifted from active investigation to the more relaxed posture of an animal that had satisfied its curiosity and was ready to move on to other activities. The bear's apparent decision to depart created a sense of cautious optimism among the congregation members. Though Dr. Hendricks continued to emphasize the need for patience and careful observation before anyone attempted to leave their vehicles, Wild animal behavior could change rapidly, and premature assumptions about safety had resulted in numerous preventable injuries in similar situations. "He looks like he's getting ready to leave," Tom O'Brien observed from his position behind the steering wheel, "but we should probably wait until he's completely out of sight before we try to assess the damage or decide what to do next." Reverend Miller, despite his desire to immediately check on the condition of their picnic site, recognized the wisdom in Tom's cautious approach. His responsibility for the safety of his congregation outweighed his natural impulse to begin cleanup and damage assessment activities. Bear greater than MT347 began walking slowly across the meadow toward the western tree line, his route taking him away from both the picnic site and the parking area where the congregation's vehicles were clustered. His movements were unhurried and deliberate, suggesting that he felt no particular pressure to escape or hide from the humans who had provided him with such an unexpected feast. As the bear approached the forest edge, his massive form gradually disappeared among the trees and shadows, though the congregation continued to watch carefully for any signs of his return. The silence that followed the bear's departure felt profound after the tension of the previous 45 minutes, creating space for the emotional processing that inevitably followed such an intense experience. "Well," Margaret Sullivan said with characteristic understatement, "that was certainly more excitement than we usually get at our church picnics." Her comment drew nervous laughter from several vehicles, providing a moment of shared relief that helped begin the emotional transition from crisis mode back toward normal functioning. The congregation's response to the emergency had demonstrated remarkable composure and cooperation, reflecting the strong community bonds that characterize St. Mary's Fellowship. At 3:05 p.m., after waiting an additional 15 minutes to ensure that Bear MT347 had truly departed the area, Tom O'Brien and Reverend Miller cautiously emerged from their vehicles to begin assessing the damage to their picnic site. The scene that greeted them exceeded their worst expectations, with the pavilion tent partially collapsed and the food service area completely destroyed. Tables had been overturned, chairs scattered, coolers emptied and trampled, and the careful organization that Eleanor Hartwell had implemented during the morning setup had been replaced by a scene of comprehensive destruction. Food remnants were scattered across a wide area, while torn packaging and overturned containers created a landscape that resembled the aftermath of a small natural disaster. "Jesus," Tom muttered under his breath, immediately regretting his language in the presence of his pastor, but unable to suppress his reaction to the extent of the damage. He really did a number on everything. John surveyed the destruction with the philosophical acceptance of someone whose faith had taught him to find meaning and purpose even in difficult circumstances. Well, it could have been much worse. Nobody was hurt, and everything here can be cleaned up or replaced. Dr. Hendricks joined them in the damage assessment, her medical training making her particularly concerned about food safety and contamination issues that might affect any salvage efforts. "We're going to need to assume that anything the bear came into contact with is potentially contaminated and should be discarded. That includes most of the food, serving utensils, and probably some of the equipment." Eleanor Hartwell approached the destruction site with the methodical mindset of someone who had spent decades solving complex organizational problems. Despite the comprehensive nature of the damage, she was already mentally categorizing items that could be salvaged versus those that would need to be replaced. "The tent structure looks like it can be repaired," Eleanor observed, examining the collapsed pavilion with professional assessment skills. "Most of the chairs and tables are just scattered, not actually broken. The real loss is going to be the food and the contaminated serving equipment." As the adults conducted their damage assessment, the children remained in the vehicles under the supervision of other congregation members, their excitement about the bear encounter gradually giving way to disappointment about the premature end of their picnic adventure. Parents were already beginning to process how to explain the day's events in ways that would satisfy their children's curiosity while not creating long-term anxiety about outdoor activities. Meanwhile, the teenage hiking group was making excellent progress on their trek to Hyalite Falls, completely unaware of the dramatic events that had occurred at the picnic site during their absence. Michael O'Brien's leadership and Rachel Hendricks's careful preparation had resulted in a successful and enjoyable hike that was proceeding exactly according to their planned schedule. At the falls themselves, the 6 teenagers were experiencing the natural wonder that made Hyalite Canyon one of Montana's most beloved outdoor destinations. The water cascaded over granite cliffs in a display of power and beauty that created lasting memories and provided countless opportunities for the photographs that would document their adventure. "This is absolutely incredible," Sarah Martinez called out over the thunderous sound of falling water, her voice filled with the awe that came from encountering natural beauty on such a grand scale. "I can't believe we get to experience this just a few miles from our picnic site." Rachel Hendricks was in her element, using her field guides to identify the various plant and animal species that thrived in the unique microclimate created by the waterfall's constant mist. Her scientific curiosity had transformed the hike into an educational adventure that satisfied her intellectual interests, while providing the physical challenge and natural beauty that appealed to her more adventurous side. Back at the meadow, the cleanup process had begun in earnest, with congregation members working systematically to salvage what could be saved while properly disposing of contaminated materials. The bear's investigation had been thorough but not malicious, resulting in destruction that was extensive but largely remediable with sufficient time and effort. Tom O'Brien had retrieved heavy-duty trash bags from his emergency supplies, and the congregation began the painstaking process of separating salvageable items from those that would need to be discarded for safety reasons. The work provided a constructive outlet for the nervous energy that remained from their encounter with bear greater than MT-347. "You know," Reverend Miller said as he helped load destroyed food containers into trash bags, "this is actually a pretty good metaphor for life in general. Sometimes unexpected things happen that disrupt our carefully made plans, but our response to those disruptions often tells us more about our character than our original plans ever could." Eleanor Hartwell smiled at John's ability to find spiritual lessons even in the midst of cleaning up bear-induced chaos. "I suppose there's something to be said for learning to adapt when circumstances change beyond our control." Dr. Hendricks was conducting a systematic inventory of the medical supplies that had been scattered during the bear's investigation, relieved to discover that most of her equipment had survived the encounter intact. Her red medical bag had been knocked over but not damaged, and the emergency communication equipment remained fully functional. As the cleanup continued, several congregation members began sharing their observations and reactions to the bear encounter, processing the experience through conversation and mutual support. The shared nature of the crisis had created a sense of communal accomplishment that actually strengthened the bonds between congregation members despite the disruption to their planned activities. "I have to admit," Margaret Sullivan said as she helped Eleanor sort through scattered serving utensils, "that was the most exciting church picnic I've attended in my 84 years. Not necessarily the most relaxing, but definitely the most memorable." Carlos Martinez, who had been quietly documenting the cleanup process with his smartphone camera, was already beginning to envision how the day's events would become part of St. Mary's congregational folklore. "Our children are going to be telling stories about the Great Bear Invasion of 2025 for decades to come." At 3:42 p.m., the teenage hiking group began their return journey from Hyalite Falls, following the same well-marked trail that had brought them to the waterfall without any awareness of the dramatic events that had transformed their picnic site during their absence. Michael O'Brien maintained his position as group leader, while Rachel Hendricks brought up the rear to ensure that all members remained together and accounted for. The return hike proceeded smoothly, with the group making excellent time despite stopping frequently to observe wildlife and interesting geological features. Their enthusiasm for the natural environment had been enhanced rather than diminished by their successful adventure, creating positive associations with wilderness activities that would influence their attitudes toward outdoor recreation for years to come. Meanwhile, at the meadow, the cleanup process was nearing completion, with most of the bear-related damage either removed or organized for later disposal. The congregation had worked with remarkable efficiency and cooperation, transforming what could have been a demoralizing disaster into a demonstration of community resilience and mutual support. "I think we've done about as much as we can do here," Tom O'Brien announced, surveying the results of their collective cleanup efforts. "The site is safe and clean, and we've salvaged everything that can be salvaged. The question now is whether we want to try to continue with any planned activities or call it a day and head back to town." Dr. Hendricks, who had been monitoring the physical and emotional status of all congregation members throughout the crisis and cleanup process, offered her professional assessment of their collective condition. "Everyone seems to be handling this very well, but I think the stress and adrenaline are starting to catch up with some people. My recommendation would be to pack up and head home, especially with the teenage group still out on their hike." Reverend Miller nodded in agreement with Patricia's assessment, recognizing that the day's events had provided more than enough memorable experiences for one church picnic. "I think Dr. Hendricks is right. We've had our adventure for today, and everyone's safety should be our top priority as we finish up here." Eleanor Hartwell, despite her natural inclination to salvage something positive from any situation, reluctantly agreed that departure was the most prudent course of action. "It's disappointing to end the picnic early, but we've certainly got a story that nobody's going to forget anytime soon." At 3:58 p.m., the teenage hiking group emerged from the forest at the northern edge of the meadow, their faces flushed with exercise and excitement from their successful adventure to Hyalite Falls. However, their enthusiasm quickly turned to confusion and concern as they observed the partially collapsed pavilion tent and the obvious signs of significant disruption to the picnic site. "What happened here?" Michael O'Brien called out as the group approached their parents and other congregation members. "It looks like a tornado hit the place while we were gone." Rachel Hendricks immediately began photographing the scene, her scientific curiosity engaged by the obvious evidence of some kind of dramatic event that had occurred during their absence. Her trained eye quickly identified scattered food containers, overturned furniture, and other signs that suggested an encounter with large wildlife. "Not a tornado," Reverend Miller replied, with a smile that combined relief at their safe return with amusement at their obvious confusion. "We had a visit from a very large, very hungry black bear who decided to help himself to most of our lunch." The teenagers' reactions ranged from excitement to disappointment to regret that they had missed what was clearly the most dramatic event in St. Mary's picnic history. Their questions came rapidly and overlapped each other as they tried to piece together exactly what had happened during their 4-hour absence. "Was anyone hurt?" Rachel Hendricks asked immediately, her mother's medical training having influenced her priorities even at 15 years old. "Nobody was hurt," Dr. Hendricks assured her daughter and the other teenagers. "The bear was actually quite well behaved, considering the circumstances. He was interested in food, not people." and he left peacefully after he finished investigating our lunch setup. Michael O'Brien surveyed the damage with the pragmatic assessment skills he had inherited from his father, quickly recognizing that the destruction was comprehensive but not catastrophic. So basically, we missed the most exciting thing that's ever happened at a church picnic because we were off looking at a waterfall. Tom O'Brien laughed at his son's obvious disappointment about missing the excitement. Trust me, it was a lot more stressful when it was happening than it probably sounds now. You guys had the better end of the deal, getting to enjoy your hike without worrying about whether a 400-pound bear was going to decide he wanted to investigate humans as thoroughly as he investigated our food. As the teenagers processed the story of their missed bear encounter, the adult congregation members were completing their final preparations for departure. Vehicles were loaded with salvaged equipment and personal belongings, while the meadow was left in a condition that respected both the landowner's property and the natural environment that surrounded them. The convoy formation for the return journey to Bozeman would be modified to accommodate the changed circumstances of their departure, with Dr. Hendricks leading the procession in case any medical issues arose as the stress and adrenaline of the bear encounter gradually wore off. Tom O'Brien would again serve as the sweep vehicle, ensuring that all congregation members remained together during the return trip. At 4:23 p.m., the convoy began its departure from the meadow, with 11 vehicles carrying 87 congregation members whose annual picnic had become a story that would be retold for generations within St. Mary's community. The bear encounter had transformed what was intended to be a routine fellowship gathering into an adventure that would strengthen community bonds and provide endless material for future storytelling. As Reverend Miller led the convoy down the rough dirt road toward Hyalite Canyon Road, he reflected on the day's events and their implications for his ministry and his understanding of divine providence. The crisis had revealed the strength and character of his congregation, demonstrating qualities of courage, cooperation, and mutual care that embodied the best aspects of Christian fellowship. The return journey to Bozeman proceeded smoothly, with the convoy maintaining appropriate spacing and speed for mountain driving conditions. Radio communication between vehicles allowed for coordination and mutual support, while the shared experience of the bear encounter created a sense of camaraderie that transcended the usual social boundaries within the congregation. Eleanor Hartwell, riding once again in Tom O'Brien's truck, was already beginning to plan the logistics for next year's picnic, including enhanced wildlife precautions and revised food storage protocols that would minimize the likelihood of attracting unwanted animal attention. Her organizational mind had automatically shifted from crisis management to prevention and improvement planning. "Next year," Eleanor announced to her fellow passengers, "we're going to invest in bear-proof food storage containers and establish clear protocols for wildlife encounters. Today worked out well because everyone stayed calm and followed instructions, but we should be better prepared if something like this ever happens again." Dr. Hendricks, monitoring her rearview mirror to maintain visual contact with the vehicles following her, was already composing the incident report that she would file with both church leadership and local wildlife authorities. The bear encounter represented valuable data that could help improve safety protocols for future outdoor gatherings in bear habitat. "I'm actually impressed with how well everyone handled the situation," Patricia commented to her family. "Panic could have made things much more dangerous, but people stayed calm and worked together to keep everyone safe." Rachel Hendricks was reviewing the photographs she had taken throughout the day, recognizing that her documentation of both the hiking adventure and the bear encounter aftermath would provide valuable memories and potentially useful information for wildlife management purposes. As the convoy reached the transition from dirt road to paved highway, The teenagers in various vehicles were already beginning to craft the stories they would tell friends and classmates about their church picnic adventure. The combination of their successful hike to Hyalite Falls and the dramatic bear encounter would provide social currency that would last well into the following school year. Michael O'Brien was particularly focused on the lessons learned from serving as leader of the teenage hiking group, recognizing that emergency preparedness and group management skills would serve him well in future outdoor adventures. His successful leadership during the hike had built confidence that would influence his approach to challenges throughout his high school years. Meanwhile, back in the forest surrounding the meadow, Bear, greater than MT-347, had settled into a comfortable afternoon nap in a sunny clearing approximately 1 mile from the picnic site. His belly remained distended from the enormous quantity of human food he had consumed, providing the kind of caloric surplus that would significantly contribute to his preparation for the coming winter's hibernation. The bear's encounter with the saint. Mary's congregation had been entirely positive from his perspective, resulting in a substantial food reward without any negative consequences or conflicts with humans. This experience would be incorporated into his behavioral memory, potentially influencing his future responses to human activities and food sources within his territory. At 5:47 p.m., the convoy arrived back at St. Mary's Church, where the familiar sight of their home parking lot provided a sense of closure and safety after the day's unexpected adventure. The process of unloading vehicles and saying farewell would take on special significance as congregation members processed their shared experience and expressed gratitude for everyone's safety during the crisis. Reverend Miller stood in the church parking lot as families retrieved their belongings and prepared to return to their homes, offering brief individual conversations with anyone who wanted to discuss their reactions to the day's events. His pastoral experience had taught him that dramatic experiences often triggered delayed emotional responses that required supportive attention. "John," Margaret Sullivan said as she gathered her empty pie container and other belongings, "I want you to know that I've been attending church picnics for more years than most people have been alive, and today reminded me why I love this congregation so much. When things got scary, everyone looked out for everyone else." Eleanor Hartwell was already making mental notes about the equipment that would need to be replaced before next year's picnic, while also beginning to plan the celebration dinner that would commemorate their bear encounter adventure. Her organizational instincts had shifted seamlessly from crisis management to community-building activities. Dr. Hendricks was conducting informal medical check-ins with congregation members, particularly the elderly and anyone who had shown signs of stress during the bear encounter. Her professional responsibility extended beyond immediate medical care to include monitoring for delayed stress reactions that might require follow-up attention. As families departed for their homes, the teenagers were already planning social media posts and phone calls that would share their adventure with friends and extended family members. The combination of successful outdoor adventure and dramatic wildlife encounter provided exactly the kind of story that would capture imaginations and inspire envy among their peers. Tom O'Brien was loading his damaged equipment into his garage while mentally calculating the costs of replacement and repair, though his primary emotion was gratitude that the day had ended without any injuries or serious complications. His experience as a construction foreman had taught him that successful crisis management was measured by safety outcomes rather than property preservation. The O'Brien family dinner that evening would feature animated retellings of the day's events from multiple perspectives, with 7-year-old David providing the most dramatic interpretations, while 14-year-old Michael offered more analytical assessments of the bear's behavior and the congregation's response strategies. Jessica O'Brien was already planning the replacement brownies she would make for the rescheduled fellowship gathering that would inevitably follow their abbreviated picnic, while also processing her own emotional responses to the stress of watching a large predator investigate their community gathering. Over the following days, the story of St. Mary's Great Bear Encounter would spread throughout Bozeman's religious and social communities, becoming a celebrated example of how groups could respond effectively to unexpected wildlife emergencies through calm cooperation and mutual support. Local wildlife authorities would interview several congregation members and review Rachel Hendricks' photographic documentation to gather information about bear greater than MT-347's behavior and current territory usage. The data would be incorporated into ongoing research about human-bear interactions in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. The Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks Department would issue a brief press release acknowledging the incident and using it as an opportunity to remind residents and visitors about proper food storage and wildlife safety protocols for outdoor activities in bear habitat. Bear greater than MT-347 would continue his normal seasonal activities within his established territory with the St. Mary's Picnic, representing a memorable but non-defining event in his ongoing survival and reproduction efforts. The abundant calories from human food would contribute to his winter preparation, without fundamentally altering his natural behaviors or habitat preferences. For the members of St. Mary's Episcopal Church, May 25, 2025, would be remembered as the day their annual picnic became an adventure that demonstrated the strength of their community bonds and their collective ability to respond effectively to unexpected challenges while maintaining the values of mutual care and support that defined their congregational identity. Reverend John Miller would incorporate the lessons and experiences of the bear encounter into future sermons about finding meaning in unexpected events, trusting in divine providence during difficult circumstances, and recognizing the ways that communities grow stronger through shared challenges that test and reveal their fundamental character. The story would become part of St. Mary's institutional memory, retold at future picnics and fellowship gatherings as an example of how ordinary people can respond extraordinarily well to extraordinary circumstances when they maintain faith, courage, and commitment to each other's welfare above their individual concerns. Eleanor Hartwell would spend the following weeks planning enhanced safety protocols and wildlife management strategies for future outdoor gatherings, while also organizing the replacement of damaged equipment and the rescheduling of fellowship activities that would allow the congregation to celebrate their successful crisis management and continued community bonds. Dr. Patricia Hendricks would incorporate her experience from the bear encounter into her ongoing emergency preparedness presentations for community groups, using the incident as a case study in effective crisis response, group leadership during emergencies, and the importance of advanced planning for outdoor activities in wilderness areas. The teenage members of the congregation, led by Michael O'Brien and Rachel Hendricks, would develop enhanced outdoor education programming for younger church members, sharing their hiking expertise and wildlife safety knowledge to ensure that future adventures would be both exciting and appropriately managed for maximum safety and educational value. Over time, the Great Bear Encounter of 2025 would evolve from a stressful emergency into a cherished community memory that strengthened relationships, demonstrated character, and provided countless opportunities for storytelling that would entertain and educate future generations of St. Mary's congregation members and their extended families and friends. The incident would also contribute to improved wildlife management protocols within the Highlight Canyon area, as local authorities incorporated lessons learned from the congregation's experience into revised recommendations for group activities in bear habitat during peak foraging seasons, when animals were most likely to investigate human food sources. Years later, when Michael O'Brien and Rachel Hendricks had graduated from high school and moved on to college and careers, they would continue to credit their experience during the bear encounter with shaping their approaches to crisis management, outdoor recreation, and community leadership in ways that influenced their personal and professional development throughout their adult lives. The meadow in Hyalite Canyon would continue to serve as the site for St. Mary's annual picnics, with enhanced precautions and protocols that honored both the natural environment and the wildlife that called the area home, while ensuring that future gatherings could proceed safely and enjoyably for all participants. Bear greater than MT347 would live for several more years within his established territory, occasionally encountering humans, but never again finding such an abundant and easily accessible food source as the one provided by St. Mary's congregation on that memorable spring day in 2025. The story of their encounter would be retold countless times, growing richer and more detailed with each telling, until it became one of those legendary community experiences that defined the character and spirit of a group of people who discovered that they could face unexpected challenges with grace, courage, and mutual support that reflected the best aspects of human nature and religious community. In the end, what had begun as a routine church picnic had become a transformative experience that strengthened faith, deepened relationships, and created memories that would last for generations, demonstrating once again that the most meaningful adventures in life are often the ones that nobody plans but everyone remembers forever. The next story is Grizzly Kills Alaska School Teacher in 4 Minutes. October 12th, 2024. Grizzly Kills Alaska School Teacher in 4 Minutes. October 12th, 2024. The morning fog hung low over Sitka Sound on October 12, 2024, obscuring the distant peaks of Baranof Island in a shroud of grey mist that seemed to press down upon the small coastal town like a burial cloth. Rachel Marie Donnelly stood at her classroom window on the second floor of Sitka Elementary School, watching the vapor rise from her coffee mug as she surveyed the parking lot below. At 34, she possessed the weathered beauty of someone who had spent the better part of a decade in Alaska's unforgiving wilderness. Her auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, green eyes sharp with the intelligence that had made her one of the most beloved teachers in the Sitka school district. She wore a thick wool sweater in forest green, jeans that had seen countless hiking adventures, and sturdy boots that could handle anything Alaska might throw at her. The irony would not be lost on investigators later that Rachel Donnelly, who had survived solo camping trips in Denali, whitewater rafting expeditions down the Copper River, and countless encounters with Alaska's wildlife, would meet her end in a school parking lot less than 50 yards from safety. Rachel had arrived in Sitka 7 years earlier, fresh from a teaching position in Portland, Oregon, drawn by the promise of adventure and the higher salary that Alaska offered educators willing to brave the last frontier. Born and raised in Eugene, Oregon, she was the eldest daughter of Dr. Michael Donnelly, a retired veterinarian who had spent 40 years treating everything from household pets to injured wildlife, and Sarah Donnelly, a librarian who had instilled in Rachel a love of learning that would define her career. Rachel's younger sister, Jennifer, often joked that Rachel had inherited their father's fearlessness around animals and their mother's nurturing instincts, a combination that made her a natural teacher and an intrepid explorer of Alaska's wilderness. During her college years at the University of Oregon, Rachel had majored in elementary education with a minor in environmental science, writing her senior thesis on outdoor education programs for urban children. She had spent summers working as a camp counselor in the Cascade Mountains, leading groups of children on nature hikes and teaching them about wildlife conservation. It was during one of these summer programs that she first encountered a black bear, watching from a safe distance as the animal foraged for berries near their campsite. The experience had filled her with awe rather than fear, cementing her belief that humans and wildlife could coexist peacefully with proper knowledge and respect. When the position at Sitka Elementary had opened in the fall of 2017, Rachel had jumped at the opportunity. The school served a diverse population of approximately 400 students, ranging from kindergarten through 5th grade, with a significant portion being Alaska Native children from the local Tlingit community. The building itself was a modern structure, completed in 2003, featuring large windows designed to maximize natural light during Alaska's long winter months, and a layout that emphasized open spaces and collaborative learning environments. Rachel's 2nd grade classroom occupied the southwest corner of the building's upper floor, providing views of both the school's playground and the faculty parking lot, which was separated from the surrounding forest by a chain-link fence that had been installed 5 years earlier following several reports of wildlife on school grounds. The faculty parking lot where Rachel would meet her fate was a rectangular asphalt surface measuring approximately 150 feet by 80 feet, marked with painted spaces for 36 vehicles. It was bordered on the north and east by the school building, on the south by Catlean Street, and on the west by a dense stand of Sitka spruce, western hemlock, and Alaska yellow cedar that formed part of the vast Tongass National Forest. The trees rose to heights of over 100 feet, their canopy so thick that the forest floor remained in perpetual twilight even on the brightest days. A small creek ran through the woods, approximately 200 yards from the parking lot, providing a reliable water source that attracted various forms of wildlife throughout the year. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game had documented sightings of black bears, brown bears, deer, porcupines, and numerous smaller mammals in the immediate area, leading to the installation of bear-resistant garbage containers and the implementation of strict protocols for food storage and waste disposal. Rachel's Honda CR-V, a 2019 model in pearl white, occupied space number 18 in the 3rd row of the parking lot, positioned roughly 40 feet from the forest edge. She had purchased the vehicle 2 years earlier specifically for Alaska's challenging driving conditions, attracted by its all-wheel drive capability and higher ground clearance. The SUV bore the scars of Alaskan life: small chips in the windshield from gravel roads, rust spots along the wheel wells from winter salt treatments, and a collection of bumper stickers that told the story of her adventures across the state. Alaska Grown shared space with Tongass National Forest, Iditarod 2023, and Coexist, featuring symbols representing various world religions. The interior reflected her dual life as teacher and outdoor enthusiast, with an emergency kit in the back containing bear spray, a satellite communicator, first aid supplies, and enough food and water for several days, standard equipment for anyone serious about Alaska wilderness travel. On this particular morning, Rachel felt a familiar excitement building as she reviewed her lesson plans for the day. Her 2nd grade class consisted of 22 students, ranging in age from 7 to 8 years old, representing the multicultural tapestry that made Sitka unique. Among them was Tommy Carhart, whose Tlingit name meant small bear, an irony that would haunt his family for years to come. Tommy's grandfather, Robert Carhart Sr., was a respected elder in the local Tlingit community and had served for over 2 decades as a cultural liaison between the tribe and the school district. 8-year-old Maria Santos represented the growing Latino population in Sitka, her father Carlos having moved the family from California to work in the commercial fishing industry. Aidan Murphy, son of Deputy Sheriff Patrick Murphy, was known for his curiosity about law enforcement and often asked Rachel detailed questions about safety procedures. Sarah Chen's parents had relocated from Seattle when her mother, Dr. Lisa Chen, accepted a position at the Southeast Alaska Regional Health Consortium. These children, along with their 18 classmates, would become unwitting witnesses to a tragedy that would forever alter their understanding of the world around them. The lesson plan for October 12th focused on animal habitats, a subject Rachel approached with the enthusiasm of someone who had observed wildlife in their natural environments across Alaska. She had prepared a comprehensive presentation featuring photographs she had taken during her hiking expeditions, including images of various bear species, their feeding habits, and their roles in Alaska's ecosystem. The timing of the lesson, occurring just weeks before bears would enter their winter hibernation, was intentionally chosen to help students understand seasonal wildlife behavior. Rachel had coordinated with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game to have wildlife biologist Dr. Amanda Richardson visit the following week to discuss bear safety, a standard component of education in Alaska communities where human-wildlife encounters were a regular occurrence. Dr. Richardson, who held a PhD in wildlife biology from the University of Alaska Fairbanks, had been studying brown bear populations in southeast Alaska for over 15 years. Her research focused particularly on the behavioral patterns of bears living in close proximity to human settlements, and she had published extensively on the factors that contributed to human-bear conflicts. Standing 5 feet 8 inches with silver-streaked brown hair typically pulled back in a functional bun, Dr. Richardson possessed the calm confidence of someone who had spent thousands of hours in the field observing dangerous wildlife. Her weathered hands bore small scars from years of handling research equipment in harsh conditions, and her keen blue eyes missed nothing when it came to animal behavior. She had been scheduled to arrive at Sitka Elementary at 2:30 p.m. on October 19th, exactly 1 week after Rachel Donnelly's death. A presentation that would instead become a memorial service and trauma counseling session. The morning of October 12th had begun routinely enough, with Rachel arriving at school at 7:15 a.m., 45 minutes before the first bell. Her early arrival was a well-established habit, allowing her time to prepare materials, review the day's schedule, and ensure her classroom was ready for learning. She parked her Honda CR-V in the same spot she had occupied for the past 2 school years, space number 18, backing into the space, as was her custom, to facilitate easier departure at the end of the day. The parking lot was already 1/3 full with vehicles belonging to other early arriving staff members, including Principal Margaret Thompson's silver Subaru Outback, Vice Principal David Martinez's black Ford F-150, and the bright yellow Jeep Wrangler belonging to kindergarten teacher Susan Walsh. Principal Thompson, a 58-year-old education veteran with 34 years of experience in Alaska schools, had hired Rachel personally and considered her one of the most effective teachers in the building. Standing 5 feet 6 inches with prematurely gray hair that she wore in a professional bob, Thompson possessed the organizational skills and calm demeanor necessary to manage a school in Alaska's challenging environment. Her office, located on the first floor, with windows overlooking the main entrance, was decorated with photographs from various school events and awards recognizing both her professional achievements and community service. Thompson had grown up in Anchorage, the daughter of a military family stationed at Elmendorf Air Force Base, and had witnessed firsthand the unique challenges facing Alaska's educational system. Her decision to pursue a career in education had been influenced by a 3rd-grade teacher named Mrs. Patterson, who had recognized Thompson's leadership potential and encouraged her to consider teaching as a profession. Vice Principal Martinez brought a different perspective to the school's administrative team, having relocated to Sitka from Phoenix, Arizona, 3 years earlier with his wife Carmen and 2 teenage daughters, Isabella and Sophia. At 44, he maintained the athletic build of his former career as a high school basketball coach, though Alaska's climate had required significant adjustments to his outdoor activities. His office, adjacent to Thompson's, featured a collection of southwestern pottery that served as reminders of his Arizona roots, alongside photographs of Sitka's landscape that documented his growing appreciation for Alaska's natural beauty. Martinez had initially struggled with the transition from Arizona's desert environment to Alaska's coastal rainforest, but he had gradually developed a deep respect for the unique challenges and opportunities presented by their northern location. The teaching staff at Sitka Elementary reflected the diverse backgrounds of people drawn to Alaska's educational opportunities. Susan Walsh, the kindergarten teacher with the distinctive yellow Jeep, was a 62-year-old Alaska native who had been born in Juneau and spent her entire career in Southeast Alaska schools. Her classroom, located on the first floor near the main entrance, was known for its welcoming atmosphere and creative decorations that changed with each season. Walsh had taught 3 generations of some Sitka families and possessed an institutional memory that made her invaluable to newer staff members like Rachel. Her experience with Alaska wildlife was extensive, having grown up in a family of commercial fishermen who understood the importance of respecting the natural world while making a living from it. Walsh's nephew, Kyle Walsh, served as the school's head of maintenance, a 28-year-old who had inherited his family's practical skills and deep knowledge of Southeast Alaska's environment. 4th grade teacher Michael Petrov represented the school's connection to Alaska's Russian heritage, his great-grandfather having been among the Russian settlers who had established Sitka as the capital of Russian America in the early 1800s. At 39, Petrov combined his family's historical knowledge with modern teaching techniques, often incorporating local history into his curriculum in ways that helped students understand their community's unique cultural heritage. His classroom featured reproductions of Russian colonial artifacts alongside contemporary student artwork, creating an environment that celebrated both past and present. Petrov's knowledge of local wildlife came from years of subsistence hunting and fishing, activities that remained important components of Alaska native and long-term resident lifestyles. His wife, Elena Petrov, worked as a nurse at the local clinic and would later play a crucial role in the emergency response following Rachel's attack. The morning routine at Sitka Elementary followed patterns established over decades of Alaska school operations, modified by the unique challenges of their geographic location and climate. The building's heating system, a complex network of boilers and radiant heat designed to handle temperatures that could drop to 20 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit, began its daily cycle at 5 a.m. to ensure comfortable conditions for arriving staff and students. Custodial staff, led by head custodian Robert Bob Hendricks, a former military police officer who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan before settling in Alaska, arrived at 6 a.m. to complete final preparations for the school day. Hendricks, a 47-year-old with a methodical approach to building security, conducted a thorough perimeter check each morning that included inspection of the fence line, examination of garbage containers for signs of wildlife activity, and verification that all exterior doors and windows remained secure. The morning of October 12th, Hendricks had noted several observations that would later prove significant to investigators. During his 6:30 a.m. perimeter check, he had discovered fresh scratch marks on one of the bear-resistant garbage containers located near the southeast corner of the building, approximately 60 feet from where Rachel would park her vehicle 2 hours later. The scratches appeared recent, with wood chips and metal shavings scattered on the ground below the container, suggesting a determined effort by a large animal to access the contents. More concerning was the discovery of several large paw prints in the soft earth near the forest edge, prints that measured approximately 10 inches in length and 6 inches in width, indicating the presence of a mature brown bear rather than the smaller black bears more commonly seen in the area. Hendricks had immediately photographed the evidence with his cell phone and reported his findings to Principal Thompson, who arrived at school 15 minutes later. Following established protocols, Thompson contacted the Alaska Department of Fish and Game's 24-hour wildlife hotline to report the bear sign, speaking with dispatcher Linda Kowalski at 7:05 a.m. Kowalski, a 28-year veteran of the department who had handled thousands of wildlife reports throughout her career, logged the information and assigned it a standard priority rating, indicating that a wildlife officer would investigate within 48 hours unless the situation escalated to an immediate threat level. The response time reflected the reality of wildlife management in Alaska, where reports of bear sign were common and resources were limited to address only the most urgent situations. Wildlife Officer Sarah Mitchell, a 31-year-old who had joined the Alaska Department of Fish and Game 4 years earlier after completing a degree in wildlife biology at the University of Montana, received the dispatch at 8:20 a.m. while responding to another call involving a moose that had wandered into downtown Sitka. Mitchell, who stood 5 feet 7 inches with blonde hair typically braided for fieldwork, possessed extensive experience in human-wildlife conflict resolution and had completed specialized training in bear behavior analysis. Her daily equipment included a .300 Winchester Magnum rifle, multiple containers of bear spray, a tranquilizer gun for situations requiring capture rather than lethal intervention, and communication equipment that kept her in constant contact with both her department and local law enforcement agencies. The delay in Mitchell's response to the Sitka Elementary report would later become a subject of intense scrutiny during the investigation that followed Rachel's death. Her supervisor, Regional Wildlife Manager Captain James Burke, a 26-year department veteran with extensive experience in Southeast Alaska, would ultimately determine that Mitchell had followed proper protocols by prioritizing the immediate public safety threat posed by the downtown moose over the bear sign report from the school. Burke, who had investigated over 40 human-bear encounters during his career, understood that bear sign near human settlements was common throughout Alaska, and that the presence of tracks and scratch marks did not necessarily indicate an imminent threat to public safety. As the school day began with the first bell at 8 a.m., Rachel had already completed her morning preparations and stood at her classroom window watching students arrive via bus and private vehicle. The student pickup and drop-off area was located on the opposite side of the building from the faculty parking lot, providing an additional buffer between children and the forest edge where wildlife was most likely to emerge. This separation had been a deliberate design choice when the school was constructed, reflecting input from both educational professionals and wildlife management experts who understood the importance of minimizing potential human-animal conflicts in Alaska's challenging environment. The student body of Sitka Elementary represented the demographic diversity that characterized many Alaska communities, blending Alaska Native heritage with newcomers drawn by economic opportunities or lifestyle preferences. Among the students in Rachel's second grade class, the cultural mix provided rich opportunities for learning about different traditions and perspectives. Tommy Kehart's family maintained strong connections to traditional Tlingit culture, including subsistence activities that required intimate knowledge of local wildlife behavior and seasonal patterns. His grandfather, Robert Carhart Sr., served as a cultural advisor to the school district and regularly shared traditional ecological knowledge with both students and staff members who were interested in understanding Alaska Native approaches to living in harmony with the natural world. Maria Santos represented the growing Latino population in Sitka, her family having been drawn to Alaska by opportunities in the commercial fishing industry. Her father, Carlos Santos, worked as a deckhand on various fishing vessels throughout the summer salmon season, while her mother, Elena Santos, maintained the household and worked part-time at a local restaurant during the busy tourist season. The Santos family had initially struggled with Alaska's climate and cultural differences, but they had gradually established themselves as valued members of the community through Carlos's reputation as a reliable worker and Elena's involvement in school activities and community events. Aidan Murphy's connection to law enforcement through his father, Deputy Sheriff Patrick Murphy, provided unique insights into public safety challenges in Alaska communities. Deputy Murphy, a 15-year veteran of the Sitka Police Department, possessed extensive experience in wildlife-related emergency responses and had undergone specialized training in bear encounter procedures. His duty equipment included bear spray, a 12-gauge shotgun with slugs specifically designed for large animal encounters, and communication gear that connected him directly to fish and game wildlife officers when situations required coordinated responses. Murphy's knowledge of local wildlife patterns had been acquired through years of responding to calls involving animals in residential areas, vehicle-wildlife collisions, and occasional aggressive animal encounters that required law enforcement intervention. Dr. Lisa Chen represented the medical professionals who provided essential services to Alaska communities, having relocated from Seattle with her family to accept a position as an emergency room physician at Southeast Alaska Regional Health Consortium. Her daughter Sarah was among Rachel's most academically gifted students, possessing a curiosity about the natural world that Rachel particularly enjoyed nurturing through hands-on learning experiences and field observations. Dr. Chen's medical background would prove tragically relevant to the events of October 12th, as she would be among the first responders called to treat Rachel's injuries, despite the ultimate futility of medical intervention in the face of massive trauma inflicted by an animal weighing nearly half a ton. The morning lessons proceeded according to Rachel's carefully planned schedule, beginning with a review of the previous day's material on animal classification and progressing to new content about habitat requirements for different species. Rachel's teaching style emphasized interactive learning, encouraging students to ask questions and share their own observations about local wildlife. The timing proved particularly engaging, as several students reported recent wildlife sightings from their home neighborhoods, including Tommy Kierhart's account of watching a family of black bears feeding on salmon berries near his grandmother's house the previous weekend. Rachel had prepared an extensive collection of photographs for the day's presentation, images she had captured during her numerous hiking and camping expeditions throughout Southeast Alaska. The photographs documented various bear species in their natural habitats, including several spectacular shots of brown bears fishing for salmon in remote streams and black bears foraging for berries in alpine meadows. Her favorite image, which she planned to use as the centerpiece of the lesson, showed a massive brown bear standing on its hind legs beside a waterfall, demonstrating the impressive size and power that made these animals both fascinating and potentially dangerous. The photograph had been taken during a solo camping trip to Admiralty Island the previous summer, an expedition that had required extensive preparation and careful attention to safety protocols. Admiralty Island, located approximately 40 miles northeast of Sitka, supported one of the highest densities of brown bears in North America, with an estimated population of over 1,500 bears inhabiting the island's 1,600 square miles of wilderness. Rachel's decision to camp alone on Admiralty Island had reflected both her confidence in her outdoor skills and her deep appreciation for Alaska's wildlife, though friends and family had expressed concerns about the risks involved in solo wilderness travel in such a bear-dense environment. The camping expedition had been planned months in advance, with Rachel obtaining the necessary permits from the U.S. Forest Service and developing a detailed itinerary that included specific campsites, hiking routes, and emergency contingency plans. Her equipment list reflected years of wilderness experience, including a bear-resistant food container, multiple canisters of bear spray, a satellite communication device, and enough supplies to remain self-sufficient for up to a week in case weather or other factors prevented her scheduled departure. The trip had proceeded without incident, providing Rachel with both stunning photographs and increased confidence in her ability to coexist safely with Alaska's most formidable predators. As the morning progressed toward the lunch period, Rachel's excitement about the afternoon's wildlife lesson was evident to her students, who had grown accustomed to their teachers' enthusiasm for outdoor education and environmental science. The lesson plan called for students to work in small groups to create habitat dioramas featuring different Alaska animals, with particular emphasis on the environmental factors that influenced animal behavior and distribution. Rachel had prepared a collection of craft materials and reference books to support the activity, planning to circulate among the groups to provide guidance and answer questions about animal adaptations and survival strategies. The lunch period at Sitka Elementary, scheduled from 12:15 to 1 p.m., provided a natural break in the school day that allowed students to refuel and socialize while giving teachers time to prepare for afternoon activities. Rachel typically used this period to review lesson materials, update student records, and occasionally step outside for fresh air when weather conditions permitted. On October 12th, the weather was unusually pleasant for mid-fall in southeast Alaska, with temperatures reaching 52 degrees Fahrenheit and partly cloudy skies that allowed intermittent sunshine to break through the typical overcast conditions. The cafeteria staff, led by Nutrition Services Coordinator Margaret Maggie O'Sullivan, a robust woman in her mid-50s who had managed food service operations at various Alaska schools for over 20 years, served a menu designed to appeal to diverse cultural preferences while meeting federal nutrition standards. O'Sullivan's background included previous positions in Anchorage and Fairbanks, giving her extensive experience with the logistical challenges of food service in remote Alaska communities where supply chains were often disrupted by weather or transportation difficulties. Her staff of 4 part-time assistants prepared daily meals for approximately 400 students and 60 staff members, requiring careful planning to ensure adequate quantities while minimizing food waste that might attract wildlife to school grounds. The waste management protocols at Sitka Elementary had been developed in consultation with both the Alaska Department of Fish and Game and local waste management professionals who understood the critical importance of preventing wildlife attraction to school properties. All food waste was collected in bear-resistant containers that were emptied daily by a commercial hauling service, while recyclable materials were stored in a separate secured area until weekly pickup. The protocols specifically prohibited the disposal of any food materials in regular trash receptacles and required immediate cleanup of any spilled food or beverages on school grounds. These measures reflected hard-learned lessons from other Alaska communities where improper waste management had led to serious human-wildlife conflicts. During the lunch period on October 12th, custodial staff member Janet Morrison, a 43-year-old who had worked at the school for 8 years, conducted her routine inspection of the exterior waste storage areas. Morrison, whose previous experience included positions at 2 other Alaska schools, possessed a keen eye for signs of wildlife activity and took pride in maintaining school grounds that minimized animal attraction. Her inspection checklist included verification that all waste containers remained properly secured, removal of any debris that might attract animals, and documentation of any signs suggesting wildlife presence in the immediate area. Morrison's inspection at 12:45 p.m. revealed additional evidence of bear activity beyond what custodian Bob Hendricks had observed that morning. She discovered several large paw prints in the soft mud near the loading dock behind the cafeteria, prints that appeared to have been made within the past 12 hours, based on their sharp definition and the absence of any rainfall that might have degraded the impressions. More concerning was the discovery of bear scat approximately 30 yards into the forest edge, suggesting that at least one bear had spent considerable time in the immediate vicinity of school property within the past day or two. Following established protocols, Morrison immediately photographed the evidence and reported her findings to Principal Thompson, who was in her office reviewing afternoon schedules when Morrison's call came through the school's internal communication system. Thompson's response reflected the seriousness with which Alaska educators approached wildlife management issues, immediately contacting the Alaska Department of Fish and Game to provide an update to the morning's bear sign report and requesting an elevated priority response from wildlife officers. Her 12:52 p.m. call reached the same dispatcher, Linda Kowalski, who had logged the morning report and who immediately recognized the escalating nature of the situation. Kowalski's decision to upgrade the priority status of the Sitka Elementary Bear Activity Report reflected her extensive experience in evaluating wildlife threat levels and her understanding of the potential consequences of large predators in proximity to schools. Her immediate action was to contact Wildlife Officer Sarah Mitchell, who was at that moment completing paperwork related to the downtown moose situation she had resolved earlier in the morning. Mitchell's response was immediate and professional, indicating that she would proceed directly to Sitka Elementary to conduct a thorough investigation and implement appropriate public safety measures based on her findings. Mitchell's estimated arrival time at the school was 1:30 p.m., exactly 1 hour and 37 minutes before Rachel Donnelly would walk across the parking lot toward her Honda CR-V for the final time. The timing would later be analyzed extensively by investigators seeking to understand whether earlier intervention might have prevented the tragedy, though wildlife behavior experts would ultimately conclude that the bear responsible for Rachel's death had likely been in the area for several days, and that its attack was triggered by immediate circumstances rather than factors that could have been predicted or prevented through normal wildlife management protocols. As the lunch period concluded and students returned to their classrooms for afternoon lessons, Rachel felt a familiar surge of anticipation about the wildlife education activities she had planned. Her classroom had been rearranged to accommodate small group work, with desks pushed together to create collaborative spaces and craft materials organized on a central table where students could access supplies as needed for their habitat diorama projects. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the classroom windows created an atmosphere of warmth and creativity that Rachel particularly enjoyed during the darker months of Alaska's winter season. The first afternoon activity involved students working in groups of 3 or 4 to design and construct dioramas representing different Alaska animal habitats, with each group assigned a specific ecosystem, such as coastal rainforest, alpine tundra, interior boreal forest, or Arctic coastal plain. Rachel had prepared detailed reference materials for each habitat type, including photographs, species lists, and information about environmental factors that influenced animal distribution and behavior. Her role during the activity was to circulate among the groups, providing guidance and answering questions while encouraging students to think critically about the relationships between animals and their environments. Tommy Kayahart's group was assigned the coastal rainforest habitat, allowing him to draw upon traditional knowledge passed down from his grandfather about the animals that inhabited the forests surrounding Sitka. His group partners, Maria Santos and a quiet girl named Jennifer Walsh, whose aunt was kindergarten teacher Susan Walsh, brought different perspectives to the project based on their own family backgrounds and interests. Tommy's contribution included detailed information about bear behavior that he had learned through stories and direct observation during family subsistence activities, knowledge that would prove to be remarkably accurate when compared to the behavioral patterns exhibited by the bear that would attack Rachel less than 3 hours later. As the afternoon progressed, Rachel moved from group to group, providing encouragement and educational guidance while marveling at the creativity and insight her students brought to their projects. Her interactions with each group were characterized by genuine interest in their ideas and patient explanations of concepts that challenged their understanding. The habitat diorama activity represented the type of hands-on, experiential learning that Rachel believed was most effective for elementary-age students, combining creativity with scientific inquiry in ways that made abstract concepts concrete and memorable. At 2:15 p.m., 15 minutes before the scheduled end of the school day, Rachel began the process of having students present their completed dioramas to the rest of the class. Each group was given approximately 3 minutes to describe their habitat, identify the animals they had included, and explain the adaptations that allowed those animals to survive in their chosen environment. The presentations provided an opportunity for students to practice public speaking skills while reinforcing the scientific concepts that had been the focus of the lesson, creating a sense of accomplishment and shared learning that epitomized Rachel's approach to education. Tommy Kayahart's group presentation about the coastal rainforest habitat proved particularly engaging, with Tommy providing detailed descriptions of bear denning behavior, seasonal feeding patterns, and the territorial ranges that brought bears into contact with human communities. His knowledge, derived from traditional Tlingit understanding of wildlife behavior, included insights about bear communication through scent marking, the importance of salmon runs in determining bear distribution, and the factors that could cause normally reclusive bears to behave aggressively toward humans. The information would later be recognized by wildlife biologists as remarkably sophisticated for an 8-year-old child, reflecting the depth of traditional ecological knowledge maintained by Alaska Native communities. As the presentations concluded and students began cleaning up their work areas, Rachel felt a deep satisfaction with the day's accomplishments. The wildlife habitat lesson had achieved its educational objectives while engaging students in meaningful discussions about Alaska's natural environment and the challenges facing both wildlife and human communities in an increasingly interconnected world. Her plan for the following day included a continuation of the habitat theme with focus on animal adaptations for winter survival, a topic that would become heartbreakingly relevant as investigators later attempted to understand the behavioral factors that had driven a normally hibernation-preparing bear to remain active and aggressive in mid-October. The final bell at 2:30 p.m. triggered the familiar chaos of elementary school dismissal, with students gathering backpacks and coats while making plans for after-school activities and homework completion. Rachel's classroom routine included helping students organize their materials, ensuring that art projects were properly stored for future display, and providing individual reminders about upcoming assignments or special events. Her interactions with departing students were characterized by warmth and genuine interest in their lives outside of school, reflecting the caring relationships that had made her one of the most beloved teachers in the building. As students departed through the main entrance to meet waiting buses or parents, Rachel began her own end-of-day routine, which typically required 15 to 20 minutes to complete. Her checklist included updating lesson plan notes based on the day's observations, organizing materials for the following day's activities, entering attendance and behavioral observations into student records, and ensuring that her classroom was properly secured for the night. The routine reflected both professional responsibility and the practical necessities of teaching in Alaska, where heating costs and security considerations required careful attention to building systems and access control. At 2:47 p.m., Rachel completed her final classroom tasks and gathered her personal belongings in preparation for the walk to her vehicle. Her routine departure equipment included a leather messenger bag containing lesson planning materials and personal items, a heavy wool coat suitable for Alaska's unpredictable weather, and her purse, which contained keys, wallet, cell phone, and a small canister of bear spray that she carried as standard equipment during outdoor activities. The bear spray, manufactured by Counterassault and containing a concentrated capsaicin formula designed specifically for large animal deterrence, represented Rachel's practical approach to wilderness safety, though she had never had occasion to use it during her 7 years in Alaska. The walk from Rachel's second-floor classroom to the main exit typically required approximately 2 minutes, following a route that led down the central staircase, through the main hallway past the principal's office and school library, and out the front entrance toward the faculty parking lot. On October 12th, this routine journey would become the subject of extensive investigation and analysis as authorities attempted to reconstruct the precise timing of events that led to Rachel's encounter with the bear that had been stalking school property for an unknown period of time. Principal Thompson's office window provided a clear view of the faculty parking lot, and she had developed a habit of observing staff departures as part of her informal security awareness routine. On October 12th, Thompson was engaged in a phone conversation with the district office regarding budget allocations for the upcoming fiscal year when Rachel passed by her office window at approximately 2:49 p.m. Thompson would later recall that Rachel had waved cheerfully as she passed, appearing relaxed and happy as she concluded another successful day of teaching. The image of Rachel's final wave would haunt Thompson for months afterward, becoming a symbol of the ordinary moment that preceded extraordinary tragedy. The faculty parking lot on October 12th contained 28 vehicles belonging to staff members who had not yet departed for the day, creating a familiar landscape of cars and trucks that reflected the practical transportation needs of Alaska residents. Rachel's Honda CR-V occupied its customary position in Space 18, backed into the space as was her habit to facilitate easier departure. The vehicle was approximately 40 feet from the forest edge, positioned in what appeared to be a secure area well within the safety perimeter established by the chain-link fence that separated school property from the surrounding wilderness. As Rachel exited the school building at 2:50 p.m., she encountered Vice Principal Martinez, who was also departing for the day and had paused near the main entrance to check messages on his cell phone. Their brief conversation, lasting approximately 30 seconds, focused on plans for the following week's parent-teacher conferences and Rachel's enthusiasm about the wildlife education unit she was developing. Martinez would later describe Rachel as appearing completely normal and upbeat, showing no signs of concern about her walk across the parking lot to her vehicle. Their conversation concluded with Rachel mentioning her plans to stop at the grocery store before heading home, a routine that would never be completed. The distance from the school's main entrance to Rachel's parked Honda CR-V was approximately 80 yards, following a paved walkway that led directly into the faculty parking lot. The route provided clear sight lines in all directions and appeared completely safe, based on normal assessment criteria, with good lighting, minimal visual obstructions, and proximity to the school building where assistance would be immediately available if needed. Security cameras mounted on the school building's exterior provided coverage of the parking area, though the system was designed primarily to monitor for theft and vandalism rather than wildlife encounters. At 2:51 p.m., as Rachel began her walk across the parking lot, Wildlife Officer Sarah Mitchell was approximately 6 miles away, completing her response to a different wildlife report while maintaining communication with dispatcher Linda Kowalski about her planned arrival at Sitka Elementary. Mitchell's truck contained comprehensive equipment for wildlife management situations, including tranquilizer guns, bear spray, firearms, and communication gear. but the distance and timing meant that no intervention would be possible during the critical minutes that were about to unfold. The massive brown bear that would attack Rachel had likely been observing school property for several hours, possibly from a concealed position within the dense forest that bordered the parking lot's western edge. Post-incident analysis of the bear's behavior patterns suggested that it had been attracted to the area by food odors from the school cafeteria and had remained in the vicinity throughout the day, becoming increasingly bold as its natural caution was overcome by hunger and curiosity. The timing of Rachel's departure, occurring during the bear's most active feeding period, and at a moment when most other staff members had already left the building, created a perfect storm of circumstances that transformed a routine walk to her car into a fatal encounter with one of North America's most formidable predators. Wildlife behavior experts would later analyze the sequence of events that brought bear and human together in the faculty parking lot of Sitka Elementary, identifying multiple factors that contributed to the tragedy. The bear, estimated to weigh between 850 and 900 pounds based on paw print measurements and witness descriptions, represented a mature male brown bear that should have been preparing for winter hibernation by consuming massive quantities of food to build fat reserves necessary for surviving months of dormancy. The failure of normal hibernation preparation behaviors suggested that the bear may have been injured, diseased, or displaced from its normal territory by competition with other bears, any of which could explain its presence near human habitation during a time when bears typically avoided contact with people. The first indication of the bear's presence came at 2:52 p.m., when Rachel was approximately halfway across the parking lot, still 30 yards from her Honda CR-V and an equal distance from the safety of the school building. Several students who remained in classrooms for after-school tutoring programs noticed movement in the forest edge, though initially they assumed it was a smaller animal like a deer or porcupine. 8-year-old Tommy Kaya-Hart, who was working with reading specialist Mrs. Jennifer Davis in the library, looked up from his book and saw what he later described as something big and brown moving through the trees approximately 50 feet behind the parking lot. Tommy's traditional Tlingit upbringing had taught him to observe wildlife carefully, and his immediate reaction was concern rather than excitement. He quietly alerted Mrs. Davis, a 35-year-old educator who had worked in Alaska schools for 12 years and understood the seriousness of any wildlife sighting near school grounds. Davis immediately moved to the library windows for a better view while instructing Tommy and the 3 other students present to remain calm and stay away from the windows. Her training in emergency procedures included protocols for wildlife encounters, and she reached for the emergency communication device that connected directly to the principal's office. At the same moment, in Principal Thompson's office, the conversation with the district office was interrupted by Davis's emergency call, reporting a possible bear sighting in the woods behind the faculty parking lot. Thompson's response was immediate and professional, ending her district call and activating the school's emergency communication system while moving to her office window for visual confirmation. What she saw through her window would be burned into her memory forever. The image of Rachel Donnelly walking normally across the parking lot, completely unaware that death was stalking her from the forest shadows. Thompson's emergency protocol training took over as she simultaneously called 911 and used the school's public address system to alert remaining staff members to the wildlife emergency. Her voice, carefully controlled to avoid panic while conveying urgency, echoed through the largely empty building as she announced, "Code Brown, faculty parking lot, Code Brown, faculty parking lot," the designated signal for dangerous wildlife on school property. The announcement reached Vice Principal Martinez, who had just entered his office to retrieve forgotten paperwork. Custodian Bob Hendricks, who was securing the building's exterior doors, and approximately 15 staff members who remained in the building for various after-school activities. Martinez's response was immediate, grabbing the emergency radio that connected to both local police and fish and game services, while rushing toward the nearest exit that would provide access to the faculty parking lot. His Arizona background had not prepared him for wildlife emergencies, but 3 years in Alaska had taught him to take such situations seriously and to follow established protocols without hesitation. His radio call to Deputy Sheriff Patrick Murphy included the code phrase, "large predator," in proximity to personnel, triggering an immediate emergency response from multiple agencies. Bob Hendricks, whose military background included experience with dangerous wildlife in Afghanistan, moved quickly toward the building's exterior to assess the situation and determine whether immediate intervention was possible. His emergency equipment included bear spray and an air horn designed to frighten wildlife, though he understood that confronting a large brown bear required extreme caution and that his primary responsibility was to ensure that additional people did not inadvertently enter the danger zone. The bear that would kill Rachel Donnelly emerged from the forest edge at 2:53 p.m., approximately 60 feet behind her Honda CR-V, moving with the deceptive speed that characterized large brown bears despite their massive size. The animal stood nearly 4 feet tall at the shoulder when walking on all fours, with a distinctive shoulder hump that identified it as a brown bear rather than the smaller black bears more commonly seen in the area. Its coat was a rich chocolate brown, with lighter tips on the guard hairs, and its massive head and powerful jaws reflected the bone-crushing capability that made brown bears among the most dangerous predators in North America. Witness accounts from multiple vantage points would later provide investigators with a detailed timeline of the bear's approach and attack sequence. From the library windows, Tommy Kayahart and Mrs. Davis watched as the bear moved along the forest edge, apparently following Rachel's scent trail and maintaining a distance that kept it concealed behind parked vehicles. The animal's behavior demonstrated the intelligence and predatory instincts that had allowed brown bears to survive and thrive in Alaska's challenging environment for thousands of years. Principal Thompson's view from her office window provided a different perspective on the unfolding tragedy, allowing her to observe both Rachel's continued progress toward her vehicle and the bear's parallel movement through the parking lot. Her later testimony would describe the bear's movement as deliberate and purposeful, suggesting that the animal had been tracking Rachel specifically, rather than simply wandering through the area. The bear's posture and behavior patterns indicated heightened alertness and predatory focus, characteristics that wildlife experts recognized as warning signs of an imminent attack. Rachel remained completely unaware of the danger approaching from behind as she continued walking toward her Honda CR-V, her attention focused on retrieving her keys from her purse and planning her evening activities. Her relaxed demeanor and normal walking pace reflected the confidence that came from 7 years of safe wilderness travel in Alaska. Though this experience had involved planned expeditions with proper safety equipment and awareness protocols, rather than the everyday routine of walking to her car after work. The critical moment came at 2:54 p.m. when Rachel reached her Honda CR-V and began the process of unlocking the driver's side door. The sound of her keychain jingling and the electronic beep of the vehicle's security system disengaging provided audio cues that attracted the bear's immediate attention, causing the animal to alter its approach from cautious stalking to direct confrontation. Wildlife behaviorists would later explain that mechanical sounds, particularly those associated with human technology, could trigger aggressive responses in bears that were already in a heightened state of alertness. The bear's charge began from a distance of approximately 30 feet, covering the ground between its concealed position behind a pickup truck and Rachel's location in less than 3 seconds. Brown bears, despite their massive size, could reach speeds of up to 35 miles per hour when charging, and the confined space of the parking lot provided no opportunity for evasion or escape. Rachel's first awareness of the danger came when she heard the sound of claws on asphalt behind her, causing her to turn just as the bear reached striking distance. The attack sequence that followed would be captured by multiple security cameras and witnessed by numerous school personnel, creating a detailed record of events that would haunt the Sitka community for years to come. Rachel's initial reaction was to reach for the bear spray in her purse, demonstrating the wilderness safety training that had kept her safe during countless outdoor adventures. However, the speed of the bear's approach and the limited space available for maneuvering meant that she had insufficient time to deploy the defensive weapon effectively. The bear's first contact with Rachel occurred at 2:54:17 p.m., according to security camera timestamps, when the animal struck her with its right front paw while she was attempting to open her car door. The blow, delivered with enough force to dent the vehicle's metal door panel, sent Rachel stumbling backward and caused her to drop both her keys and purse. The bear spray canister, which might have provided some protection if deployed immediately, rolled under a nearby vehicle and became inaccessible during the critical moments that followed. Rachel's survival instincts, honed by years of wilderness experience, caused her to attempt to create distance between herself and the attacking bear by moving around the rear of her Honda CR-V. This maneuver, while tactically sound in theory, actually placed her in a more vulnerable position by moving her further from the school building where potential assistance might be available. The bear, demonstrating the intelligence and adaptability that characterized its species, immediately moved to cut off Rachel's escape route by positioning itself between her and any possible avenue of retreat. The second phase of the attack began at 2:54 p.m. when the bear reared up on its hind legs, reaching a height of approximately 8 feet and displaying the full intimidating presence that had made brown bears legendary among Alaska's indigenous peoples. From this position, the bear struck downward with both front paws, a behavior known as boxing, that brown bears use to establish dominance and deliver devastating blows to their opponents. Rachel's attempt to protect herself by raising her arms resulted in severe injuries to both forearms and hands, as the bear's claws, each measuring up to 4 inches in length, inflicted deep lacerations through her clothing and into muscle and bone. The sound of the attack, including Rachel's screams and the bear's aggressive vocalizations, carried clearly through the school's windows and reached the ears of dozens of students and staff members who would carry the trauma of those sounds for the rest of their lives. Principal Thompson's immediate response was to activate the school's lockdown procedures while continuing to coordinate emergency response efforts through multiple communication channels. Her training and experience allowed her to maintain professional composure while witnessing events that would challenge the psychological resilience of even the most experienced emergency responders. Vice Principal Martinez reached the exterior of the school building at 2:54:30 p.m., emerging from a side entrance that provided access to the faculty parking lot while maintaining a safe distance from the attack in progress. His emergency radio communication with Deputy Sheriff Patrick Murphy included a detailed description of the ongoing attack and an urgent request for immediate backup from all available emergency services. Martinez's background in athletics and crisis management enabled him to remain calm while observing the tragedy, though his later testimony would reveal the profound emotional impact of witnessing a colleague and friend being killed by a wild animal. The bear's attack entered its most violent phase at 2:54:35 p.m. when the animal dropped back to all fours and began using its powerful jaws to inflict additional injuries. Brown bears possessed bite forces exceeding 1,200 pounds per square inch, capable of crushing bone and causing massive tissue damage with each attack. Rachel's attempts to defend herself became increasingly desperate as the severity of her injuries mounted, though her wilderness experience provided her with knowledge of bear behavior that might have prolonged her survival under different circumstances. The attack sequence continued with relentless intensity as the bear demonstrated the predatory persistence that made brown bears apex predators in Alaska's ecosystem. Each strike of the animal's claws and each bite inflicted additional trauma that rapidly overwhelmed Rachel's ability to defend herself or seek escape. The confined space of the parking lot, which should have provided safety and security, became a trap that prevented any possibility of evasion or retreat. Custodian Bob Hendricks reached a position where he could observe the attack at 2:54:45 p.m., though his distance from the scene and the presence of intervening vehicles prevented any direct intervention. His military experience included encounters with dangerous wildlife, but the reality of confronting a 900-pound brown bear in an active attack exceeded the capabilities of any individual without specialized equipment and training. Hendricks's immediate focus shifted to ensuring that no additional people entered the danger zone while maintaining communication with emergency responders about the ongoing situation. The emergency response to Rachel's attack began with Deputy Sheriff Patrick Murphy's departure from the Sitka Police Department at 2:55 p.m., exactly 1 minute after receiving Vice Principal Martinez's emergency radio call. Murphy's response vehicle was equipped with specialized wildlife encounter equipment, including a 12-gauge shotgun loaded with slugs designed for large animal encounters, multiple canisters of bear spray, and communication gear that kept him in contact with both fish and game officers and medical emergency services. His estimated arrival time at Sitka Elementary was 2:58 p.m., though the remote possibility of intervention was already becoming academic as the attack entered its final phase. Wildlife Officer Sarah Mitchell received the emergency dispatch at 2:55:30 p.m. while still en route to Sitka Elementary for her scheduled investigation of bear sign reports. Her immediate response was to contact dispatcher Linda Kowalski with an updated emergency status and estimated arrival time, while accelerating her response to maximum safe speed given road conditions and traffic circumstances. Mitchell's specialized training in wildlife emergency response included protocols for active bear attacks, though her experience had taught her that human survival rates in such encounters were extremely low once the attack progressed beyond the initial contact phase. The attack reached its conclusion at 2:56:42 p.m., according to security camera evidence, when the bear ceased its aggressive behavior and began moving away from Rachel's motionless form. The total duration of active attack was 2 minutes and 25 seconds, though the massive trauma inflicted during that brief period had resulted in injuries that were incompatible with survival. The bear's departure from the immediate attack site followed patterns consistent with normal brown bear behavior following a successful predatory encounter, with the animal moving back toward the forest edge while maintaining awareness of its surroundings for potential threats or opportunities. Rachel's final moments, witnessed by multiple observers but ultimately experienced in isolation, represented the tragic culmination of a series of circumstances that had brought human and wildlife together in fatal conflict. Her wilderness experience and safety training had provided her with knowledge and equipment that might have prevented the attack under different circumstances, but the speed and intensity of the bear's assault had overwhelmed even the most thorough preparation and defensive measures. The immediate aftermath of the attack saw emergency responders converging on Sitka Elementary from multiple directions, though their arrival came too late to provide meaningful assistance to Rachel. Deputy Sheriff Murphy reached the school at 2:58 p.m., followed closely by an ambulance crew from the Southeast Alaska Regional Health Consortium at 3:01 p.m., and Wildlife Officer Mitchell at 3:03 p.m. The coordinated response reflected the professionalism and preparation of Alaska's emergency services, though the reality of wildlife attacks meant that success often depended on prevention rather than intervention after an encounter had begun. Dr. Lisa Chen, whose daughter Sarah was among Rachel's students, arrived at the school in her capacity as emergency physician at 3:05 p.m., having been contacted by the hospital's dispatch service about a wildlife attack requiring immediate medical response. Her professional assessment of Rachel's condition was swift and definitive, though her emotional response to treating the injuries of her daughter's beloved teacher would require extensive counseling and support in the months that followed. The bear responsible for Rachel's death disappeared into the dense forest surrounding Sitka Elementary, beginning a manhunt that would involve dozens of searches, sophisticated tracking technology, and ultimately lethal intervention when the animal was located 4 days later, approximately 2 miles from the school. The bear's behavior following the attack, including its movement patterns and continued presence near human habitation, confirmed wildlife officials' assessment that the animal represented an ongoing threat to public safety that required permanent resolution. News of Rachel's death spread rapidly through the close-knit community of Sitka, generating shock and grief that reflected both the personal relationships she had built during her 7 years in Alaska and the broader implications of a fatal wildlife attack in what should have been a secure location. The tragedy would ultimately prompt comprehensive reviews of wildlife management protocols, school security procedures, and emergency response capabilities throughout Southeast Alaska. The investigation that followed Rachel's death would involve multiple agencies and disciplines, including the Alaska State Troopers, the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Evidence Response Team, wildlife behavior specialists from the University of Alaska, and trauma counselors specializing in community response to violent events. The complexity of the investigation reflected both the legal requirements surrounding wildlife-related fatalities and the community's need to understand how such a tragedy could occur in order to prevent similar incidents in the future. The psychological impact of witnessing Rachel's attack would affect dozens of individuals, including students, staff members, emergency responders, and community members who had developed personal relationships with the victim during her years of service to Sitka's educational community. The trauma experienced by those who observed the attack, particularly the children who witnessed events from classroom windows, would require extensive professional intervention and ongoing support services that would continue for years following the incident. Media coverage of Rachel's death would extend far beyond the local Alaska newspapers and radio stations, attracting national and international attention to the challenges facing communities that coexisted with large predators in wilderness environments. The story would be featured in wildlife magazines, educational journals, and documentary productions that examined the complex relationships between human development and wildlife habitat in Alaska's unique ecosystem. The legal proceedings that followed the attack would focus primarily on questions of liability and prevention rather than criminal responsibility, given the obvious facts surrounding a wildlife attack. However, the investigation would examine whether existing protocols and procedures had been followed appropriately and whether changes to safety procedures might prevent similar tragedies in the future. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game would face particular scrutiny regarding their response time to initial bear sign reports and the prioritization of wildlife threats in communities with schools and other vulnerable populations. The memorial service for Rachel Donnelly, held at Sitka's historic St. Michael's Cathedral on October 19, 2024, drew over 800 attendees from throughout Southeast Alaska, reflecting the impact she had made during her relatively brief time in the community. The service featured tributes from students, colleagues, community leaders, and wildlife officials who spoke about Rachel's dedication to education, her love of Alaska's natural environment, and the tragic irony of her death at the hands of the wildlife she had worked so hard to understand and protect. Her parents, Dr. Michael and Sarah Donnelly, traveled from Oregon to attend the service and to begin the difficult process of settling their daughter's affairs in a community that had become her chosen home. Their grief was compounded by the circumstances of Rachel's death, though they found some comfort in the overwhelming support provided by the Sitka community and the clear evidence of the positive impact their daughter had made on the lives of her students and colleagues. The bear that killed Rachel Donnelly was ultimately tracked down and destroyed by Wildlife Officer Sarah Mitchell and a team of specialized hunters on October 16, 2024, 4 days after the attack. The animal was found approximately 2 miles from Sitka Elementary in a densely forested area where it had been feeding on the carcass of a deer it had killed following its encounter with Rachel. Post-mortem examination of the bear revealed evidence of chronic injuries to its jaw and front paws that may have impaired its ability to hunt normal prey, potentially explaining its desperate behavior and willingness to approach human habitation in search of food. The necropsy performed on the bear by state wildlife veterinarians revealed additional information about the animal's condition and behavior patterns that contributed to the attack. The bear showed signs of advanced arthritis in its major joints, dental problems that would have affected its ability to process normal food sources, and scarring consistent with territorial fights with other bears. These factors, combined with the approaching winter season and the bear's need to accumulate fat reserves for hibernation, created a situation where normal caution around humans was overcome by desperation and hunger. Genetic analysis of tissue samples from the bear indicated that it was likely a descendant of the brown bear population that had inhabited the Sitka area for thousands of years, rather than a newcomer displaced from other territories. This finding suggested that the attack resulted from individual circumstances rather than broader changes in wildlife distribution patterns, though it raised questions about whether other bears in the local population might be experiencing similar health issues that could lead to aggressive behavior around humans. The school district's response to Rachel's death included immediate implementation of enhanced security measures, installation of additional bear-resistant fencing around the entire school perimeter, and development of new protocols for wildlife threat assessment and emergency response. Principal Thompson worked closely with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game to establish a rapid response system that would ensure immediate wildlife officer presence whenever bear sign was reported on or near school property. The emotional recovery process for Sitka Elementary students and staff required extensive professional intervention, with trauma counselors from throughout Alaska providing services to help community members process their grief and manage the psychological aftermath of witnessing such violence. The counseling program would continue for over 2 years, with particular attention paid to the children who had observed the attack and the adults who had been responsible for their safety during the crisis. The educational impact of Rachel's death extended beyond the immediate grief and trauma, as the school district developed new curricula focused on wildlife safety and emergency preparedness that would be implemented throughout Southeast Alaska. The programs, designed in consultation with traditional Alaska Native knowledge holders and modern wildlife biologists, aimed to provide students with practical skills for coexisting safely with Alaska's wildlife while maintaining respect for the natural world that Rachel had loved so deeply. Dr. Amanda Richardson, the wildlife biologist who had been scheduled to present to Rachel's class, ultimately delivered her educational program as planned on October 19th, though the content was modified to address the tragedy and provide age-appropriate information about bear behavior and safety. Her presentation became an annual memorial lecture that honored Rachel's commitment to environmental education while providing practical information that might prevent future wildlife encounters. The physical memorials to Rachel's life and service included a scholarship fund established by her former students' families to support educators pursuing wilderness and environmental education training, a memorial garden planted on the school grounds featuring native Alaska plants that provided habitat for local wildlife, and a dedicated classroom that housed the school's environmental education resources and materials. The investigation's final report, released 6 months after the attack, concluded that Rachel's death resulted from an extraordinary convergence of circumstances that could not have been reasonably predicted or prevented through normal safety protocols. The report did recommend enhanced communication procedures between schools and wildlife management agencies, improved fencing and security measures around school properties in wildlife habitat areas, and mandatory bear safety training for all staff members working in Alaska's wilderness communities. The long-term impact of Rachel Donnelly's death would influence wildlife management policies throughout Alaska, leading to increased funding for human-wildlife conflict prevention programs, enhanced training for emergency responders dealing with wildlife encounters, and improved coordination between educational institutions and wildlife management agencies. Her legacy would ultimately contribute to safer coexistence between Alaska's human and wildlife communities, though at a cost that could never be justified by the benefits achieved. The story of Rachel Donnelly's death remains a reminder of the inherent risks facing those who choose to live and work in Alaska's magnificent but dangerous wilderness environment, where the line between civilization and wild nature remains perpetually thin and occasionally fatal. Her commitment to education, her love of Alaska's natural world, and her tragic encounter with one of North America's most powerful predators created a narrative that would be remembered and studied for decades to come, serving as both a memorial to her life and a cautionary tale about the realities of coexisting with wildlife in the last frontier.